The champagne flute shattered against the hardwood floor of the Fairmont penthouse, sending crystal shards across Sarah Chen's bare feet like tiny daggers. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the searing humiliation burning through her chest as she stared at the explicit messages glowing on Marcus's phone screen. "Can't wait to feel you inside me again." Sarah has no idea what she's missing. The photograph below showed Marcus with her best friend Jessica, both naked, both laughing at what they believed was their perfect secret. The timestamp was from 3 hours ago, while Sarah had been at the florist, finalizing arrangements for their wedding next month. "Sarah, I can explain." Marcus's voice cut through the party chatter, but she was already pushing through the crowd of their engagement party guests, past the shocked faces of family members and colleagues who had witnessed her public breakdown. 24 hours later, Sarah found herself driving north on Highway 101, her Honda Civic packed with everything that mattered from their shared apartment. San Francisco disappeared in her rearview mirror along with her old life, her career at the tech startup, and every plan she'd made for the future. She needed isolation. Complete, total isolation where no one could find her, call her, or remind her of the spectacular way her life had imploded. The Airbnb listing appeared like a gift from the universe. Pine Ridge Retreat, authentic rustic cabin, total privacy, healing environment, 5-star reviews, stunning photos of a log cabin nestled in old-growth Oregon forest. And most importantly, the description promised, "No neighbors for miles. Perfect for digital detox and soul recovery." The host, David Hartwell, had responded to her booking request within minutes. "Dear Sarah, I can sense from your message that you're going through a difficult time. Pine Ridge has been a sanctuary for many wounded souls. I've personally ensured every detail will support your healing journey. The cabin stocks everything you need. Just bring yourself and your courage to heal. David." His empathy had made her cry, the first genuine tears since finding those messages. Someone understood. Someone cared enough to offer real sanctuary. The drive to the cabin took 6 hours through increasingly dense forest. Sarah's GPS lost signal twice, forcing her to rely on David's detailed directions. "Turn left at the lightning-struck oak. Continue past the abandoned ranger station. Follow the dirt road until you see the hand-carved Pine Ridge sign." Darkness was settling over the Cascade Mountains when Sarah's headlights finally illuminated the cabin. It was exactly as advertised. A 2-story log structure with a wraparound porch, warm light glowing through diamond pane windows, and smoke curling from the stone chimney. A small placard by the front door read, "Welcome home, Sarah," in elegant calligraphy. The key was where David had promised, hidden inside a realistic-looking rock by the front steps. The door opened with a satisfying creak that spoke of authenticity rather than neglect. Inside, the cabin exceeded every expectation. A fire crackled in the river rock fireplace, casting dancing shadows across rustic furniture that somehow managed to be both primitive and comfortable. Fresh wildflowers adorned the dining table beside a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir, and a handwritten note, "Sarah, may you find the peace here that you so deeply deserve. The kitchen is fully stocked, firewood is stacked on the porch, and the hiking trails begin just behind the cabin. If you need anything at all, my number is programmed into the landline. Take all the time you need to remember how extraordinary you are. David." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt her shoulders relax. She poured herself a glass of wine, settled into the oversized armchair facing the fire, and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could heal from this nightmare. Outside, something rustled in the underbrush. Sarah paused, wine glass halfway to her lips, listening. But after a moment, only the whisper of wind through pine boughs remained. City girl paranoia, she told herself. This was exactly what she needed. Pure wilderness, pure solitude, pure peace. She had no way of knowing that 50 feet away, hidden behind a massive Douglas fir, David Hartwell lowered his night vision binoculars and smiled. Sarah Chen was even more beautiful than her profile photo suggested. Vulnerable, isolated, and completely unaware that she had just checked into his personal hunting preserve. This was going to be his masterpiece. Sarah woke to the sound of birdsong and the smell of coffee. For a precious moment, she forgot where she was and why she was there. Then reality crashed back. Marcus, Jessica, the shattered engagement, the hasty escape to Oregon. But surprisingly, the familiar stab of pain felt duller this morning, as if the mountain air had somehow diluted her anguish. She padded downstairs in her pajamas, expecting to find the coffee maker on a timer. Instead, she discovered a full breakfast spread waiting on the kitchen counter. Fresh croissants, local honey, organic eggs, and coffee that was perfectly hot, as if someone had just brewed it. Confused, Sarah checked her phone. No signal, as expected in this remote location. She tried the landline David had mentioned and heard his warm voice after 2 rings. "Sarah, good morning. I hope you slept well." "David, hi. Thank you so much for the beautiful cabin, but I'm a bit confused. There's breakfast here that I didn't prepare and—" "Oh, that's part of our premium service," David interrupted smoothly. "I have a key for maintenance and restocking. I slip in when guests are sleeping to ensure you have everything needed. I hope that's all right. I know it might seem intrusive, but I've found that grieving souls need to focus on healing, not grocery shopping." His explanation made sense, and his concern felt genuine. Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in days. "That's incredibly thoughtful, thank you." "My pleasure. You're here to heal, not to worry about mundane details. I'll check in daily to ensure your comfort." The call left Sarah feeling cared for in a way that Marcus never had. David understood her needs without her having to ask, anticipated what would comfort her. It was exactly what her wounded heart needed. She established a routine over the next few days. Morning yoga on the deck overlooking the valley, afternoon hikes on the well-marked trails, evenings by the fire with her laptop, working on freelance design projects to keep her mind occupied. David's daily check-ins became a highlight, his voice warm and concerned, asking about her sleep, her emotional state, whether she needed anything. But small things began to nag at her. On the 3rd morning, she found groceries in the refrigerator that she distinctly remembered running out of. David explained that he monitored supplies remotely through a smart inventory system, restocking as needed. "Modern convenience disguised as rustic charm," he said with a laugh. Her laptop seemed sluggish, taking longer to boot up and load programs. When she mentioned it during one of David's calls, he suggested the mountain altitude might affect electronic performance. "The thin air affects everything up there," he said. "You might want to focus less on technology and more on the healing power of nature." The advice felt wise, even if the explanation seemed thin. On the 4th night, Sarah decided to take a bath in the cabin's deep clawfoot tub. As she soaked in the hot water, she had the strangest sensation of being watched. The bathroom window faced only forest, but the feeling persisted, a prickling awareness that made her hurry through her bath and dress quickly. Later, lying in bed, she heard what sounded like footsteps on the porch. Sarah held her breath, listening intently, but only heard wind rustling through pine needles. Still, sleep eluded her for hours. The next morning brought another surprise, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, different varieties than yesterday. When she called David to thank him, his response came a beat too quickly, as if rehearsed. "I have a local arrangement with a flower farm. They deliver weekly. I'm so glad they brighten your space." But Sarah hadn't seen or heard any delivery trucks on the isolated dirt road. And wouldn't she have noticed someone entering the cabin to arrange flowers? That afternoon, while organizing her clothes, she noticed her underwear drawer seemed different. Nothing missing, but the arrangement wasn't quite how she'd left it. Sarah stared at the drawer, trying to convince herself she was being paranoid. Trauma could make people suspicious of innocent things. David was simply an incredibly attentive host, going above and beyond to ensure her comfort. But the feeling of being watched persisted, stronger now during her evening baths and morning showers. She began checking the windows before undressing, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. She found herself speaking more quietly on phone calls with her sister, as if someone might overhear. On the 6th night, Sarah woke to the sound of her laptop chiming with a new message notification. Groggy, she checked the screen and froze. The message appeared to be from her own email account sent to herself, containing a single photograph. It was a picture of her sleeping in the cabin's bed, taken from inside the room, taken tonight. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she stared at the image. The angle suggested the photographer had been standing at the foot of her bed, watching her sleep, close enough to touch her. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and tried to call 911, but there was no signal. She ran to the landline, but the line was dead. Panic rising in her throat, Sarah dressed quickly and ran outside to her car. The Honda wouldn't start. She popped the hood and saw immediately that the battery cables had been disconnected. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the cabin's porch light, she heard the soft sound of someone clapping. "Bravo, Sarah." David Hartwell's voice drifted from the shadows. "You're much more observant than most of my guests. That's going to make this so much more interesting." Sarah stumbled backward toward the cabin door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. David stepped into the porch light and she saw him clearly for the first time. Tall, lean, with prematurely silver hair and eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. He wore dark clothing and carried what looked like a small electronic device. "Don't be afraid, Sarah, I'm not going to hurt you." His voice maintained that same warm, caring tone she'd grown to trust. "I just want to get to know you better, really know you. The real you, not the polished version you show the world. Stay away from me," Sarah managed, fumbling for the door handle behind her. "I'm calling the police." With what phone? David held up her cell phone, which she now realized was missing from her bedside table. "The landline? I'm afraid that's been experiencing some technical difficulties." Sarah's hand found the door handle, and she yanked it open, diving inside and slamming it shut behind her. She threw the deadbolt and backed away, scanning the room desperately for anything she could use as a weapon. "Sarah?" David's voice came through the door, still maddeningly pleasant. "There's no need for dramatics. I've been taking care of you, haven't I? Making sure you had everything you needed? I've been watching over you like a guardian angel." "You're sick," she called back, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace tools. "This is kidnapping. Stalking. I'll report you to Airbnb to the police." David's laughter cut her off. "Oh, Sarah, sweet, naive Sarah. Do you think David Hartwell is my real name? Do you think this is really an Airbnb listing? I've been perfecting this system for 3 years now. 47 women have stayed in this cabin. 47 beautiful broken souls looking for healing and isolation." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 47 women. What happened to them? "That depends on how cooperative they were. Some learned to appreciate the attention, the care I provided. Others..." His voice trailed off meaningfully. "Well, let's focus on you, Sarah. You're special. I could tell from your messages, your photos, the way you described your pain. You're exactly what I've been looking for." Sarah backed toward the kitchen, mind racing. She needed a plan, needed to think clearly despite the terror flooding her system. The cabin's landline phone sat on the counter, its cord neatly severed. Her laptop was gone from the dining table where she'd left it. "I know you're frightened," David continued, his voice moving around the cabin's exterior as he circled the building. "But fear is just excitement without breath. Once you relax, accept what's happening, you'll see how much better this can be than your old life. No more heartbreak, no more betrayal. Just us, getting to know each other completely." Sarah tried the back door, but it wouldn't budge. Something had been wedged against it from outside. The windows were old-fashioned, with decorative iron bars that she'd initially found charming. Now they looked like prison cells. A scraping sound from above made her look up. David was on the roof, doing something to the chimney. Smoke began backing up from the fireplace, filling the room with acrid fumes. "You can make this easy or hard, Sarah," his voice echoed down the chimney. "But you can't make it go away. I've invested too much time in you already. 3 weeks of planning, studying your social media, learning your preferences, your traumas, your vulnerabilities. You're not just another guest, you're going to be my masterpiece." Sarah coughed, eyes watering from the smoke. She needed air, needed to get out of the cabin before she suffocated. But opening the door meant facing David directly. She made her choice. The front door flew open and Sarah burst onto the porch, fire poker raised like a baseball bat. But David wasn't there. The porch was empty except for shadows and the sound of her own ragged breathing. behind you," he said softly. Sarah spun, swinging the poker, but David caught her wrist effortlessly. His grip was iron strong and the poker clattered to the wooden planks. "Much better," he said, studying her face in the porch light. "I can see the real Sarah now. The fighter, the survivor. You're even more perfect than I imagined." "Let me go." Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I'm going to show you something," David said, producing a small tablet from his jacket. "I want you to understand how special you are, how much care I've put into this moment." The tablet screen showed a grid of video feeds, interior views of the cabin from multiple angles. Sarah recognized the bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and living room, all captured by hidden cameras. But there were other feeds too, showing different rooms, different women. "My collection," David explained, scrolling through the feeds. "Some of these ladies have been with me for months now. Others chose to leave permanently. But you, Sarah, you're going to be my permanent guest, the crown jewel of my collection." Sarah's vision blurred with horror and rage. The broken engagement, the public humiliation, the desperate flight to Oregon. All of it had been leading to this moment, this trap disguised as sanctuary. "You're insane," she whispered. "I prefer dedicated," David replied. "Come, let me show you your new home properly. The real tour begins now." David's grip on Sarah's wrist remained unbreakable as he led her around to the back of the cabin. She'd walked past this area dozens of times during her stay, but now she noticed what she'd missed before: a separate entrance, partially concealed by overgrown rhododendron bushes, leading to what appeared to be a root cellar or basement. "Most guests never discover the real Pine Ridge," David said, producing an old-fashioned skeleton key. "The cabin upstairs is just the pretty facade, the lure. The real work happens down here." The heavy wooden door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo from the depths of hell itself. Stone steps descended into darkness, and the smell that wafted up made Sarah gag, a mixture of mildew, chemicals, and something organic and rotten that her brain refused to identify. "Please," she whispered, every instinct screaming at her to fight, to run, to do anything but descend those stairs. "I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear. Leave the country. You'll never see me again." "But I don't want to never see you again," David replied, his voice taking on the tone one might use with a confused child. "Sarah, you're thinking about this all wrong. Your old life was the prison. This is freedom. Freedom from choices, from uncertainty, from the pain of relationships that disappoint you. I'm offering you simplicity, clarity, purpose." He guided her down the stairs, flicking on lights as they descended. The basement was far larger than the cabin's footprint suggested, extending back into what must be a natural cave system. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, filing cabinets, and electronic equipment that hummed quietly in the artificial light. But it was the far wall that made Sarah's knees buckle. Photographs, hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows like a museum exhibit. All women, all appearing to be in their 20s and 30s, all beautiful in different ways. Some photos showed the women laughing, apparently unaware they were being photographed. Others captured them sleeping, bathing, or in moments of private vulnerability. Below each photograph was a name tag and a manila folder thick with documents. "My archive," David said proudly, releasing Sarah's wrist now that she stood frozen in horror. 3 years of careful documentation. Every woman who stayed at Pine Ridge, every detail of their lives, every secret, every fear, every desire. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank to the concrete floor. The scope of it was overwhelming. This wasn't the impulsive crime of a disturbed individual, but a sophisticated, long-term operation. The folders were organized alphabetically, the photographs professionally mounted, the entire display suggesting years of planning and execution. "How many?" she whispered. 47 so far, David replied, walking along the wall like a curator giving a tour. Though not all stayed permanently, some proved incompatible with the program. He stopped before a section of photographs marked with red dots. Sarah didn't want to know what the red dots meant, but David explained anyway. These ladies chose to resist the program. They made things difficult, forced unpleasant outcomes. He touched one photograph gently, a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. Rebecca was a fighter, like you. A teacher from Portland, came here after a messy divorce. She actually made it almost 2 miles into the forest before I caught up with her. Sarah's stomach churned. You killed her. I protected the program, David corrected. The individual is less important than the greater purpose. But that's not going to be necessary with you, Sarah. I can tell you're different, more evolved. You understand that struggling against fate only creates suffering. He moved to another section of the wall, this one marked with green dots. These are my success stories. Women who embraced their new reality found peace in simplicity. They're living comfortably in the extended facilities. Extended facilities? David gestured toward a heavy door at the far end of the basement. The cave system extends for miles underground. I've created comfortable living spaces, complete with amenities. My permanent guests want for nothing: food, entertainment, companionship. They've learned to appreciate the life I've given them. The casual way he spoke about imprisonment and murder, as if describing a vacation resort, made Sarah's vision swim with horror. This man had built an underground prison system, kidnapping dozens of women, killing those who resisted, keeping the rest as some sort of twisted collection. The beauty of the Pine Ridge system, David continued, moving to a desk covered with computer monitors, is the selection process. I don't choose randomly. I specifically target women who are emotionally vulnerable, isolated from family and friends, in transition periods of their lives. Women who disappear without raising immediate suspicion. One of the monitors showed real-time feeds from multiple cabin rentals. Sarah realized with sick certainty that Pine Ridge wasn't David's only hunting ground. He had an entire network of properties, all designed to lure vulnerable women into his trap. You advertise all of these online? Different platforms, different personas. Airbnb, VRBO, independent rental sites. The internet has revolutionized hunting, Sarah. I can identify and attract perfect candidates with unprecedented efficiency. David pulled out a thick folder with Sarah's name printed on the tab. Inside were printouts of her social media posts, screenshots of her text messages with Marcus, copies of her credit card statements, even her medical records. I knew you were special the moment I read your initial inquiry, he said, flipping through the documents. Recent traumatic betrayal, career instability, family relationships strained by the broken engagement, no close friends due to Jessica's betrayal. You're completely isolated, emotionally shattered, and desperate for someone who understands your pain. You're a monster, Sarah managed. I'm an artist, David corrected. And you're going to be my masterpiece. Unlike the others, I'm not going to hide you away immediately. We're going to take time to really explore who you are beneath the surface. Document your transformation from broken woman to fulfilled participant. He moved to another section of equipment, cameras, recording devices, and something that looked like a medical examination table complete with restraints. The process varies depending on the individual, David explained, running his hand along the leather straps. Some women require physical conditioning. Others respond better to psychological approaches. A few, the special ones like you, need a combination of techniques to reach their full potential. Sarah forced herself to stand, to think beyond the paralyzing terror. David was explaining his methods like a lecturer, clearly enjoying her horror, feeding on her fear, but his monologue was also giving her information she could use. He was methodical, organized, proud of his system, which meant he might also be predictable. I suppose you want to see your room now, David said, checking his watch. We have a schedule to maintain. The first 72 hours are crucial for establishing proper expectations. He moved toward the heavy door at the back of the basement, but Sarah didn't follow. She stood frozen beside his desk, staring at the monitor feeds, realizing something that sent fresh ice through her veins. Several of the feeds showed women in small underground rooms. They were alive, moving around their spaces, but their eyes held the hollow look of broken spirits. These were David's success stories, the women who had embraced their new reality. "Sarah?" David had stopped at the door, looking back at her with mild impatience. "It's time to go." But Sarah was studying the monitors more carefully, noting the locations of cameras, the layouts of the rooms, the security systems. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to save those women, she needed to understand exactly what she was facing. David Hartwell had built himself an underground kingdom of horror, and Sarah Chen had just become its newest citizen. But unlike his previous victims, Sarah had advantages David didn't know about. Her tech background, her design skills, her intimate knowledge of security systems from her startup work. David thought he was looking at a broken woman seeking healing. He had no idea he was facing a fighter who was just beginning to plan her war. Sarah's mind raced as David waited by the door to his underground prison complex. She needed time, needed to think, needed to turn her horror into strategy. 3 years of victims, dozens of women disappeared or murdered, an elaborate system that had operated without detection. But every system had vulnerabilities, and every predator had blind spots. "I need a moment," she said, pressing her hand to her forehead in what she hoped looked like overwhelming shock. "This is a lot to process." David's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Of course. I sometimes forget how overwhelming the revelation can be. Here, sit down." He guided her to a chair beside his computer desk, and Sarah noticed something crucial. The monitors were displaying real-time feeds from multiple locations, but the main control system was logged in and unlocked. Years of working in tech had taught her to recognize security protocols, and David's confidence had made him careless. "Can I have some water?" she asked, adding a slight tremor to her voice. "Certainly. I'll be right back." David headed toward a small kitchenette area built into the basement's corner. The moment his back was turned, Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard. She'd built enough security systems to recognize the software architecture. It was sophisticated but not military grade. More importantly, it was currently logged into multiple cloud storage systems where David archived his documentation. In 30 seconds, she managed to copy the network password, identify the main backup drives, and locate what appeared to be the central control system for the cabin's security features. She also triggered a mass upload of David's files to multiple law enforcement tip lines. If she didn't survive this, at least someone would find evidence of his crimes. "Here you are," David returned with a glass of water, his demeanor still patient and caring. "Better?" "A little," Sarah replied, accepting the water with hands that barely shook. Inside, her terror was crystallizing into cold, focused rage. Every woman on that wall deserved justice. The women still imprisoned in his underground chambers deserved rescue. And Sarah Chen was going to make sure they got both. "I think I'm ready to see the facilities now," she said, standing on steadier legs. David's smile broadened. "Wonderful. I knew you were adaptable." As he led her toward the heavy door, Sarah palmed a small flash drive from his desk. Insurance in case her hasty file transfer hadn't completed successfully. The door opened onto a narrow tunnel carved directly into the rock face. Battery-powered LED strips provided dim lighting, and the air smelled stale and recycled. Sarah counted her steps as they walked, information that might prove vital later. "The cave system is quite extensive," David explained, his voice echoing off stone walls. "Natural limestone formation, discovered by gold miners in the 1890s. I've simply enhanced what nature provided." They passed several heavy doors, each marked with a number and a name. Through small windows, Sarah glimpsed the rooms within, sparse but not inhumane, furnished with basics like beds, desks, and bathroom facilities. Prison cells disguised as studio apartments. "Jennifer, Angela, Michelle," David said, indicating the occupied rooms. "They've been with me for 8 months, 6 months, and a year respectively. All have found peace in their new lives." Through one window, Sarah caught sight of a young woman sitting on a bed, staring at nothing. Her eyes were vacant, her posture suggesting someone whose spirit had been systematically broken. This was David's idea of success. "They look sedated," Sarah observed. Medication helps during the adjustment period, David admitted. Nothing harmful, just mild anxiolytics to reduce stress and promote acceptance. Most women don't require pharmaceutical assistance after the first few months. They reached the end of the tunnel, where a door marked 7 stood open and waiting. The room beyond was larger than the others, with a window that showed a painted view of a forest scene instead of actual rock wall. "Your accommodation," David announced proudly. "I've prepared it specially for you." Sarah stepped inside, noting every detail. The door mechanism, the window construction, the ventilation system. The room was comfortable but clearly designed as a long-term prison. No handle on the inside of the door, no obvious way to disable the security cameras mounted in the corners. "I'll let you settle in," David said. "Dinner will arrive at 6. We'll begin your orientation program tomorrow morning." The door closed with a solid click, followed by the sound of multiple locks engaging. Sarah was alone, but she was also exactly where she needed to be, inside David's supposedly impregnable system, with information he didn't know she possessed, and access to the very network he used to monitor his victims. She sat on the bed and smiled for the first time since discovering those messages on Marcus's phone. David Hartwell thought he had captured a broken woman seeking healing and isolation. He had no idea he had just locked himself in a cave system with someone who specialized in finding and exploiting security vulnerabilities. Sarah pulled out the flash drive she'd stolen and began examining the room's electronic systems. Every camera had a data port. Every lock had a control circuit. Every piece of David's precious surveillance network was about to be turned against him. The hunter was about to discover he had trapped a predator far more dangerous than himself, and Sarah Chen was going to make sure that when she walked out of this mountain, she wouldn't be walking alone. 6 months later. The CNN reporter adjusted her earpiece as the camera focused on the entrance to the Cascade County Sheriff's Office. Behind her, FBI agents carried boxes of evidence from multiple vehicles. "This is Jennifer Walsh reporting from Oregon, where the arrest of serial killer David Hartwell has shocked investigators with the scope of his crimes. Hartwell, who operated an elaborate kidnapping and murder scheme using fake vacation rental listings, is now facing charges in connection with the deaths of at least 12 women and the imprisonment of 7 others." The camera panned to show Sarah Chen emerging from the sheriff's office, flanked by her attorney and victim services coordinator. She looked different, thinner, her black hair now cut short, but her eyes held a fierce determination that hadn't been there before. The breakthrough in this case came when victim Sarah Chen not only escaped from Hartwell's underground prison complex, but managed to document and transmit evidence of his crimes to law enforcement. Ms. Chen spent 3 days trapped in Hartwell's facility before executing what FBI officials are calling one of the most sophisticated victim-led rescue operations in recent memory. The reporter's voice continued over footage of the cave entrance, now swarming with investigators and rescue teams. Chen used her background in technology systems to hack into Hartwell's surveillance network, creating a coordinated distraction that allowed her to free 6 other imprisoned women and guide them to safety through the cave system's emergency exits. Cut to an interview with FBI Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez. Ms. Chen's actions not only saved her own life and the lives of 6 other women, but provided us with a complete archive of Hartwell's activities spanning 3 years. Her courage and quick thinking prevented what could have been many more tragedies. The camera returned to Sarah, who was now speaking at a podium set up outside the sheriff's office. "David Hartwell preyed on women who were vulnerable, isolated, and looking for healing," she said, her voice steady and strong. "He used our pain against us, turned our need for safety into a trap. But he made one crucial mistake. He underestimated what survivors are capable of when we have something to fight for." Sarah's eyes found the camera directly, and her next words seemed to burn through the screen. "If you're out there targeting vulnerable people, if you think isolation makes us weak, if you believe broken people make easy victims, you're wrong. We're not broken. We're battle-tested, and we're coming for you." The reporter signed off as Sarah walked toward a waiting car, surrounded by the other women she'd helped rescue. They moved together like a unit, supporting each other, survivors who had found strength in shared trauma. But as the news crew packed up their equipment, none of them noticed the man in the baseball cap and sunglasses watching from across the street. He lowered his phone after taking several photographs of Sarah and her companions. David Hartwell had been captured, but his network had been larger than anyone realized. There were others who shared his philosophy, his methods, his hunger for collecting broken women. And Sarah Chen had just painted a target on her back that could be seen from across the country. The war for justice was just beginning. The tremor in Jessica Palmer's hands had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal as she signed the lease agreement. 3 weeks had passed since she'd walked out of Portland General's ICU for the final time, leaving behind 6 years of saving lives and one catastrophic week that had shattered her faith in everything she'd once believed about healing. 3 patients in 7 days. COVID complications, system failures, and the kind of medical cascade that haunted nurses' nightmares. Jessica had fought for each one. Timothy Valdez, age 34, father of twin girls. Maria Santos, 28, pregnant with her first child. David Kim, 41, who'd just gotten engaged. She'd administered every medication, performed every intervention, stayed hours past her shift monitoring their deteriorating conditions. All 3 had died anyway. The breaking point came when David's fiancée screamed at Jessica in the hallway, accusing her of incompetence, of not caring enough, of failing to save the man she loved. The accusations weren't true. Jessica had documented everything perfectly, followed every protocol. But they echoed the voice in her own head that whispered she wasn't good enough, hadn't done enough, would never be enough. Now she stood in the cramped lobby of the Meridian Arms apartment building, a 4-unit brick structure built in 1952, studying the keys to apartment 1A with something approaching relief. Ground floor, 1 bedroom, no neighbors below to worry about disturbing with her insomnia-driven pacing. The building manager, Mrs. Chen, had assured her it was quiet, mostly older tenants who kept to themselves. Perfect. Jessica Palmer was done taking care of people. The moving truck had already departed, leaving Jessica surrounded by boxes that contained the remnants of her carefully organized life. She'd sold most of her furniture, keeping only essentials. The apartment felt hollow and cold, but that suited her emotional state perfectly. "Oh my goodness, are you the new tenant in 1A?" Jessica turned to find an elderly woman standing at the base of the staircase, silver hair arranged in an elegant chignon, wearing a lavender cardigan that looked hand-knitted and expensive. Despite being well into her 70s, she moved with surprising grace and energy. "Yes, I'm Jessica Palmer." She managed a polite smile, though interaction with neighbors was the last thing she wanted right now. "Eleanor Voss, apartment 2B, right above you." The woman's face brightened with genuine warmth. "How wonderful to have someone young and vibrant in the building. Are you settling in all right? Moving can be so stressful." "I'm managing, thank you." Eleanor's keen blue eyes studied Jessica with what seemed like professional assessment. "You look exhausted, dear. Are you in healthcare by any chance? I spent 40 years as a nurse. I can spot the signs of medical burnout from a mile away." Jessica's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. How could this stranger read her so easily? I'm taking a break." "Ah," Eleanor nodded knowingly. "The pandemic was brutal on all of us in the medical field. I retired from nursing 5 years ago, but I still remember that bone-deep exhaustion when you've given everything you have and it feels like it's never enough." The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. This woman understood. In 30 seconds, Eleanor had articulated what Jessica hadn't been able to explain to her supervisor, her friends, or even herself. "You know what?" Eleanor continued, eyeing the boxes scattered around Jessica's doorway. "You shouldn't be lifting all those heavy boxes in your condition. Let me help." "Oh, that's not necessary." But Eleanor was already bending to lift a box labeled medical textbooks that probably weighed 40 pounds. For a woman in her 70s, she handled it with surprising ease, carrying it into Jessica's apartment without apparent strain. "Where would you like this, dear?" Jessica followed, struck by Eleanor's natural authority and competence. "Just anywhere is fine. Really, you don't need to—" "Nonsense. I know what it's like to start over. Eleanor set the box down carefully, then turned to study Jessica's face again. You're not eating enough, are you? Or sleeping? Classic stress response. Your cortisol levels are probably through the roof. The clinical assessment, delivered with motherly concern, made Jessica's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone care about her well-being, missed the kind of nurturing attention she'd been too busy to seek from friends or family. I've been having some trouble adjusting, Jessica admitted. Of course you have. Trauma responses don't resolve overnight, especially for caregivers. We're trained to take care of everyone except ourselves. Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. I hope you don't think I'm being presumptuous, but I'm making a pot roast tonight. Far too much for one person. Would you join me for dinner? Around 6? Jessica's first instinct was to decline. She'd moved here specifically to avoid social obligations, to heal in isolation. But something in Eleanor's manner, the perfect blend of professional competence and maternal warmth, made her reconsider. That's very kind, but I don't want to impose. You wouldn't be imposing, I'll be honest, dear. I lost my husband 2 years ago, and it gets lonely up there. It would be nice to have company, especially someone who understands the medical world. The admission of loneliness struck Jessica's nurturing instincts, the very ones she'd been trying to suppress. Here was someone who needed companionship, who understood her professional struggles, who seemed genuinely interested in her well-being. 6 o'clock sounds lovely, Jessica heard herself saying. Eleanor's smile was radiant. Wonderful, and don't worry about bringing anything, just yourself. Though you might want to take a short nap first. You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks. After Eleanor left, Jessica stood in her empty apartment surrounded by unpacked boxes and felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of being cared for. Eleanor had seen her exhaustion, her emotional fragility, and responded with exactly the kind of compassionate attention Jessica craved. For the first time since leaving Portland General, Jessica allowed herself to hope that maybe she could heal after all. She had no way of knowing that Eleanor Voss had been watching the building's entrance for 3 days, waiting for the new tenant to arrive, or that the chance meeting in the lobby had been carefully orchestrated after Eleanor had reviewed Jessica's rental application, researched her employment history, and identified her as the perfect candidate for Eleanor's specialized form of care. In apartment 2B, Eleanor Voss opened a leather-bound journal and wrote, Day 1, subject JP, initial contact successful. Subject displays classic symptoms of PTSD, depression, and professional burnout. Appears socially isolated, emotionally vulnerable, and eager for maternal figure. Medical background will make this case particularly interesting. Estimated timeline, 4 to 6 weeks for full dependency establishment. She closed the journal and smiled. After 18 months without a proper patient, Eleanor was ready to practice medicine again. Jessica woke at 5:47 a.m. to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her childhood home, waking to her mother's Saturday morning ritual of coffee cake and fresh grounds. Then reality reasserted itself. She was in her sparse Portland apartment, and her mother had been dead for 8 years. The smells were coming from upstairs. She'd slept better than she had in months after dinner with Eleanor. The older woman had been the perfect hostess, attentive without being intrusive, asking gentle questions about Jessica's background while sharing stories from her own nursing career. Eleanor had worked in psychiatric facilities, specializing in what she called intensive care for troubled minds. The most rewarding work I ever did, Eleanor had explained over perfectly seasoned pot roast, helping people who couldn't help themselves, becoming the advocate they needed when the system failed them. Jessica had found herself opening up about her recent breakdown, the guilt over her lost patients, her uncertainty about returning to nursing. Eleanor had listened with the kind of focused attention that made Jessica feel truly heard for the first time in months. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Jessica, dear, I hope I'm not waking you. Eleanor's voice carried easily through the thin walls. Jessica wrapped her bathrobe around herself and opened the door to find Eleanor holding a tray laden with coffee, fresh biscuits, and what appeared to be homemade jam. "I was up early baking and made far too much," Eleanor explained, though she looked perfectly put together despite the early hour, hair styled, makeup applied, dressed in a crisp blouse and cardigan. "I thought you might like breakfast. You barely touched dinner last night." "That's incredibly thoughtful, but now don't you dare say you're not hungry. I can see you've lost weight, and that's the last thing you need right now." Eleanor stepped into the apartment without waiting for invitation, setting the tray on Jessica's small dining table. "Coffee's decaf. Regular caffeine will only worsen your anxiety levels." Jessica found herself sitting down as Eleanor bustled around the kitchen, rinsing Jessica's dirty dishes and organizing her sparse groceries with efficient competence. "Eleanor, you really don't need to eat," Eleanor commanded gently, pointing to the tray. "And tell me how you slept. Any nightmares? Racing thoughts? Night sweats?" The clinical questions, delivered with maternal concern, felt natural coming from Eleanor. Jessica bit into a biscuit that practically melted in her mouth, flavored with herbs she couldn't identify. "Actually, I slept better than I have in weeks. I think dinner helped, having someone to talk to." "Of course it did. Isolation exacerbates trauma responses. Your nervous system needs social regulation to begin healing." Eleanor finished organizing the kitchen and sat across from Jessica, watching her eat with satisfaction. "I've been thinking about what you told me last night. 3 patients in 1 week. That's not coincidence, dear. That's systemic failure. I keep thinking if I'd been more careful, more thorough." "Stop." Eleanor's voice carried quiet authority. "Self-blame is a cognitive distortion. You followed protocols, administered appropriate interventions, documented everything correctly. The system failed those patients, not you." The validation hit Jessica like a warm wave. Dr. Martinez, the hospital psychiatrist, had said similar things, but hearing it from someone who truly understood medical practice felt different. "The guilt is still there," Jessica admitted. "Guilt is useful when it motivates positive change, destructive when it becomes self-punishment." Eleanor leaned forward, studying Jessica's face intently. "Tell me about your sleep patterns, your appetite, any changes in memory or concentration." Jessica found herself detailing her symptoms: the insomnia, the way food tasted like cardboard, her inability to focus on simple tasks. Eleanor listened with the kind of focused attention that reminded Jessica why she'd once loved patient care. "Classic presentation of acute stress reaction layered over chronic burnout," Eleanor diagnosed. "Your neurochemistry is completely dysregulated. Have you considered medication?" "My doctor suggested antidepressants, but..." "Traditional psychiatrists always jump to SSRIs," Eleanor interrupted with mild disdain. "Sometimes more targeted interventions are needed, natural compounds that support neurological healing without the side effects of synthetic drugs." Eleanor pulled a small bottle from her purse, shaking out 2 capsules that looked professionally manufactured. "Adaptogenic blend, ashwagandha, rhodiola, L-theanine. I had my naturopath prepare it specifically for healthcare workers dealing with PTSD. Much more effective than prescription medications for your particular symptom profile." Jessica examined the capsules. They looked legitimate, and Eleanor's knowledge of pharmacology was clearly extensive. "Take those with the coffee," Eleanor instructed, "and I want you to start keeping a symptom journal. Rate your anxiety, sleep quality, and energy levels daily so we can track your progress." "We?" Eleanor's smile was warm but determined. "I'm not letting you navigate this alone, dear. I've seen too many good nurses destroyed by trauma they could have recovered from with proper support." Something in Jessica's chest loosened, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Here was someone who understood, who cared enough to take active interest in her recovery. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary. Just focus on healing." Eleanor stood, collecting the empty dishes. "I'll check on you this afternoon. Make sure you're eating lunch." After Eleanor left, Jessica sat in her quiet apartment feeling more hopeful than she had in months. The capsules had left her feeling calmer, more centered. For the first time since leaving Portland General, she could imagine a future where she might feel normal again. She had no way of knowing that the adaptogenic blend contained carefully calibrated doses of benzodiazepines and mild hypnotics that would create subtle dependency while making her more suggestible to Eleanor's guidance. Upstairs, Eleanor Voss updated her journal. Day 2. Subject accepting medication without resistance. Initial chemical dependency establishment in progress. Subject displays increasing reliance on external validation and guidance. Isolation from previous support systems appears complete, proceeding to phase 2. Eleanor smiled as she prepared the next day's natural supplements. Jessica Palmer was proving to be an ideal patient, intelligent enough to be interesting, damaged enough to be malleable, and trusting enough to accept help without question. The real treatment was just beginning. By the end of her second week in the Meridian Arms, Jessica had fallen into a routine that felt both comforting and increasingly necessary. Eleanor's daily visits had become the anchor of her day. Morning coffee and supplements, afternoon check-ins, evening meals shared in one apartment or the other. Jessica's symptoms had evolved in unexpected ways. The crushing anxiety that had driven her from Portland General had indeed lessened, replaced by what Eleanor called healing fatigue. A deep tiredness that made complex thought difficult, but wasn't entirely unpleasant. Her hands trembled more frequently now, but Eleanor explained that was normal as her nervous system recalibrated from months of hypervigilance. Your body is finally allowing itself to feel the accumulated stress, Eleanor explained, adjusting the dosage of Jessica's morning supplements. It's actually a positive sign that your system trusts you enough to begin processing trauma. The explanation made sense. Eleanor's medical knowledge was impressive. She understood pharmaceutical interactions, neurochemistry, and trauma responses in ways that made Jessica's own nursing education feel rudimentary. What concerned Jessica more was the memory fog that had crept in gradually. She'd lost entire conversations, forgotten appointments with her former supervisor, missed calls from her sister in Seattle. Yesterday, she'd found groceries in her refrigerator that she couldn't remember buying. "When did I get this yogurt?" she'd asked Eleanor during one of her afternoon visits. "Yesterday, dear. We went to Safeway together after lunch. Don't you remember? You were quite tired." Jessica had no recollection of leaving the apartment, much less grocery shopping. The gap in her memory was complete and terrifying. "I don't remember any of that." Eleanor's expression grew concerned. Short-term memory issues are common with severe PTSD. Your hippocampus is still healing from chronic stress exposure. That's why the journal is so important. External memory support while your brain recovers. Eleanor had started the journal for Jessica during the first week, documenting her daily symptoms, medication timing, and therapeutic activities. Looking back through the entries, Jessica could see patterns she didn't remember. Trips to medical appointments, visits with old friends, even a consultation with a lawyer about updating her will and financial documents. "I saw a lawyer?" Jessica asked, staring at an entry dated 3 days ago. "Estate planning, remember? We discussed how important it is to have your affairs organized while you're dealing with health issues. You were worried about your assets if something happened during recovery." The entry was in Jessica's handwriting, but she had absolutely no memory of writing it, or of meeting with any lawyer, or of signing the power of attorney documents that were now neatly filed in her desk drawer. "Eleanor, I'm really scared about these memory gaps." "I know, dear, but you're not losing your mind, you're healing from it. Sometimes recovery requires forgetting the details while we rebuild the foundation." Eleanor squeezed Jessica's hand reassuringly. "Trust the process. Trust me." Jessica wanted to trust Eleanor. The older woman had become her lifeline, the only person who understood her condition and seemed genuinely invested in her recovery. But the memory lapses were becoming more frequent and more complete. This morning, she'd awakened at noon with no recollection of the previous evening. Her apartment showed signs of activity. Dishes in the sink, her laptop moved to the kitchen table, medical journals scattered across the floor as if she'd been researching something urgently. She'd called Eleanor immediately. "You had a difficult night," Eleanor explained when she arrived within minutes carrying her medical bag. "Panic attack around 8 p.m. I came down to help manage it. Breathing exercises, mild sedation to break the anxiety cycle." I don't remember panicking. That's actually good. It means the intervention worked before the episode could consolidate into traumatic memory. Eleanor unpacked her stethoscope and blood pressure cuff with practiced efficiency. Let me check your vitals. Eleanor had started monitoring Jessica's physical health daily, explaining that trauma recovery required careful attention to physiological markers. Jessica's blood pressure had been running low lately, and her heart rate occasionally spiked for no apparent reason. Eleanor frowned at the blood pressure reading. 90/60. We need to adjust your electrolyte balance. She produced a bottle of what looked like medical-grade saline solution. Drink this slowly. It'll help stabilize your cardiovascular response. Jessica accepted the bottle, noticing it tasted slightly metallic but trusting Eleanor's clinical judgment. Within minutes, she felt more alert, though the underlying fatigue remained. Eleanor, I think I should see a doctor. A real doctor. These symptoms aren't normal. Eleanor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Jessica, you are seeing a medical professional. I have 40 years of clinical experience, specializing in exactly your type of presentation. Traditional doctors will want to hospitalize you, run expensive tests, prescribe harsh medications that will set back your recovery by months. But the memory loss is temporary and expected. Jessica, look at me. Eleanor's voice carried quiet authority. Do you trust me? Jessica met Eleanor's steady gaze and felt her anxiety ease. Eleanor had been nothing but caring, competent, and devoted to Jessica's well-being. She'd dropped everything to help during Jessica's crisis, providing round-the-clock support that no traditional medical system could match. I trust you. Good. Because I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're making remarkable progress, even if you can't see it yet. In another few weeks, you'll understand why this process was necessary. Eleanor gathered her medical supplies, then paused at the door. I'll be upstairs if you need anything. Try to rest this afternoon. Sleep is when the real healing happens. After Eleanor left, Jessica sat in her apartment trying to piece together the fragments of recent days. The journal entries in her own handwriting, the legal documents she didn't remember signing, the gaps in memory that seemed to grow larger each day. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered Eleanor's competence, her obvious medical expertise, her unwavering dedication to Jessica's recovery. Whatever was happening, Eleanor was helping her through it. Jessica took her afternoon supplements and settled onto the couch, letting the familiar drowsiness wash over her. Sleep came easily now, deep and dreamless and complete. Upstairs, Eleanor Voss smiled as she prepared Jessica's evening medications. The subject was responding perfectly to the treatment protocol. Increasing dependency, reduced cognitive function, complete trust in Eleanor's medical authority. The memory gaps weren't a side effect, they were the point. Eleanor updated her journal. Day 14, subject displaying optimal compliance. Short-term memory consolidation successfully disrupted. Legal documents executed without subject awareness. Beginning phase 3 tomorrow. Estimated timeline to complete dependency. 2 to 3 weeks. Eleanor had perfected this process over 18 months and 11 previous subjects. Jessica Palmer was shaping up to be her best patient yet. Jessica woke at 3:17 a.m. with a clarity of mind she hadn't experienced in weeks. The fog that had become her constant companion was gone, replaced by sharp awareness that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with her situation. She sat up in bed, and for the first time in days, the motion didn't trigger dizziness or nausea. Her hands were steady. Her thoughts felt linear and connected. Whatever Eleanor had given her yesterday, the electrolyte solution, had apparently worn off entirely. With growing horror, Jessica began to piece together fragments of recent weeks. The memory gaps weren't random. They coincided precisely with Eleanor's visits. The legal documents she'd supposedly signed, the medical appointments she couldn't remember, the groceries that appeared in her refrigerator. All of it happened during periods when her mind felt wrapped in cotton. She was being drugged. Jessica moved carefully to her laptop, typing benzodiazepine memory loss into the search engine. The results confirmed her worst fears. Short-term amnesia was a known side effect of several drugs commonly used in medical settings, drugs that a retired nurse would have easy access to. Her phone showed multiple missed calls from her sister Sarah in Seattle, all from the past week. Jessica called her back, despite the early hour. "Jess? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days." "I know, I'm sorry. I've been having some health issues." "That's what your friend Eleanor told me when she called yesterday. She said you'd asked her to contact your family because you were too ill to talk." Jessica's blood turned to ice. "Eleanor called you? Sweet lady. She explained about your breakdown, said she was helping coordinate your care. She asked about your medical history, emergency contacts, that sort of thing. Very thorough. What did you tell her?" "Everything, obviously. Family medical history, your insurance information, the name of your bank. She said she needed it to help manage your treatment." Sarah's voice grew concerned. "Jess, you sound different. Are you okay?" Jessica closed her eyes, realizing the scope of Eleanor's manipulation. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me. Call my bank first thing Monday morning and put a hold on my accounts. Then call my old supervisor at Portland General and tell her I need help." "Jesus, Jess, what's going on?" "I think I'm being poisoned by my neighbor." The words sounded insane, but saying them aloud crystallized Jessica's determination. She had perhaps hours before Eleanor's next check-in and the return of the chemical fog that had been clouding her judgment. She needed evidence. Jessica dressed quickly and quietly, then slipped out of her apartment. The building was silent, no sound from Eleanor's unit above. Using the key Eleanor had helped her obtain for building maintenance, Jessica climbed to the second floor. Eleanor's door was locked, but Jessica's nursing experience included psychiatric facilities, where patients sometimes hid contraband in impossible places. She found the spare key exactly where institutional protocol suggested, taped under the highest point someone of Eleanor's height could reach. Eleanor's apartment was a revelation that made Jessica's stomach clench with terror. The living room had been converted into a medical facility. Hospital-grade equipment lined the walls. IV pumps, cardiac monitors, ventilators, and medication refrigeration units that should have required licensing to possess. The dining table held racks of syringes, pre-filled medication vials, and what appeared to be surgical instruments arranged with obsessive precision. Jessica moved deeper into the apartment, her nursing training helping her identify equipment that belonged in intensive care units, not private homes. Everything was professional grade, properly maintained and clearly stolen from medical facilities. The bedroom contained filing cabinets filled with medical records, not just Jessica's, dozens of files, each labeled with a name, photograph, and detailed documentation. Jessica pulled her own file and felt her knees buckle. Eleanor had been documenting every aspect of Jessica's condition with clinical detachment. Daily medication logs, behavioral observations, physiological measurements. But more disturbing were the planning documents, detailed timelines for treatment phases, projected outcomes, and what Eleanor clinically termed disposal protocols. Jessica was listed as Subject 12. The previous 11 files were marked Treatment Complete, with dates spanning the past 3 years. With trembling hands, Jessica opened the file marked Subject 11, a woman named Margaret Chen, who looked about 60, with kind eyes and graying hair. According to Eleanor's notes, Margaret had been a recently widowed accountant dealing with depression who'd responded optimally to care protocols before experiencing natural cardiac arrest during week 6 of treatment. Jessica recognized the address. Margaret Chen had lived in apartment 1A before Jessica moved in. Subject 10 was Thomas Rodriguez, a 45-year-old construction worker recovering from a work injury. Treatment complete after 8 weeks due to complications from pre-existing respiratory condition. Subject 9 was Elena Vasquez, a 33-year-old teacher dealing with anxiety. Treatment complete after 10 weeks following accidental overdose during medication adjustment. Jessica realized she was looking at a serial killer's methodology. Eleanor Voss wasn't a concerned neighbor. She was a predator who had systematically murdered at least 11 people, all under the guise of providing medical care. The sound of a key in the front door made Jessica's heart stop. "Jessica?" Eleanor's voice called from the entryway. "Dear, are you here? I saw your apartment door open." Jessica looked around desperately for an escape route, but Eleanor's apartment was on the second floor with no fire escape. She was trapped. "I know you're here, Jessica." Eleanor's voice grew closer, along with the soft sound of her footsteps. "And I know you've seen my files." Jessica pressed herself against the bedroom wall, still clutching her own medical file. The documentation was extensive enough to convict Eleanor of multiple murders, if Jessica could get it to the police. "You know, you've lasted longer than most of my patients," Eleanor continued conversationally. "Usually the cognitive impairment progresses much faster, but you're a nurse. Your brain has natural resistance to pharmaceutical manipulation." Eleanor appeared in the bedroom doorway, no longer the kindly old woman who'd offered comfort and care. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and completely without empathy. "That's what made you so interesting to me, Jessica. I wanted to see if I could break someone from my own profession. Turns out the answer is yes, but it requires a more intensive approach." Eleanor held up a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Don't worry, dear. This won't hurt. You'll just go to sleep, and when you wake up, you'll be in the special care facility I've prepared, where I can monitor your treatment progress much more closely." Jessica gripped the file folder tighter. "The police will find the others. All those people you murdered." "Murdered?" Eleanor looked genuinely surprised. "I provided end-of-life care to terminally ill patients. That's what my documentation will show anyway. Proper medical records, death certificates signed by cooperative physicians, insurance claims filed appropriately." Eleanor stepped closer, syringe ready. "You're going to be my masterpiece, Jessica. A complete study of psychological breakdown in medical professionals. Your death will contribute valuable data to the field." Jessica had one advantage. She was 30 years younger and currently clear-headed, while Eleanor believed her to be drugged and compliant. When Eleanor reached for her arm, Jessica swung the heavy file folder with all her strength, catching Eleanor across the temple. The older woman staggered, dropping the syringe, and Jessica bolted for the apartment door. But as she reached the living room, Eleanor's voice stopped her cold. "Run if you want, dear, but those drugs don't leave your system for hours yet. How far do you think you'll get before you collapse? And who do you think the police will believe? A respected retired nurse with 40 years of sterling service records, or a mentally ill woman who's been displaying increasingly erratic behavior for weeks?" Jessica paused at the door, realizing the horrible truth. Eleanor had been building evidence of Jessica's mental instability for weeks. Documentation of panic attacks, medication non-compliance, paranoid episodes. If Jessica went to the police now, she'd look exactly like what Eleanor had been portraying her as, a delusional woman making wild accusations against her caring neighbor. Eleanor approached slowly, having retrieved another syringe from her medical supplies. "Come back inside, Jessica. Let me take care of you properly this time." Jessica had seconds to make a choice that would determine whether she became Eleanor's 12th victim or her first survivor. She chose to fight. Jessica's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. 6 years of emergency medicine had taught her to function under extreme stress, to make critical decisions when someone's life hung in the balance. This time, that someone was herself. Instead of running for the building's exit where Eleanor could corner her in the lobby, Jessica ran up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Eleanor's apartment building was old, built in the 1950s with standardized layouts. If apartment 2B had been converted into a medical facility, there had to be building code violations Eleanor couldn't afford to have discovered. Jessica pounded on apartment 3A's door. "Help! Call 911. My neighbor is trying to kill me." No answer. The apartment felt empty. Behind her, Eleanor's voice carried up the stairwell. "Jessica's having another episode. I'm her medical caregiver. She's been off her medications for days." Jessica tried 3B, then 3C. Empty. Eleanor had chosen this building carefully. Minimal witnesses, maximum isolation. The roof access was through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Jessica kicked it open and emerged onto the flat roof, Portland's skyline glittering in the pre-dawn darkness. Her phone finally had signal. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Jessica Palmer. I'm being held captive by Eleanor Voss at 1247 Hawthorne Boulevard. She's been drugging me for weeks and she's murdered multiple people. I'm on the roof. She's trying to inject me with something. Ma'am, can you repeat that? You said someone is trying to inject you? Eleanor Voss, apartment 2B. She's a former nurse who's been poisoning residents. I found files documenting at least 11 murders. Please send police immediately. Eleanor's voice came from directly below. Jessica, come down from there. You're going to hurt yourself. To any observer, it would look exactly like Eleanor claimed. A concerned caregiver trying to help a mentally ill woman who'd climbed onto a roof during a psychotic break. Ma'am, we're sending units to your location. Can you get to safety until they arrive? Jessica looked around desperately. The building next door was only 8 feet away, close enough to jump if she had the courage. But Eleanor was already opening the roof access door. There you are, dear. Eleanor emerged onto the roof, no longer carrying a syringe but projecting the perfect image of a worried caregiver. You're frightening me, climbing up here like this. Come away from the edge. Stay back. Jessica held up her phone. I've already called the police. They know about your files, your equipment, the people you've killed. Jessica, you're having a paranoid episode. There are no files, no equipment, just an old woman trying to help you through a mental health crisis. Eleanor's voice carried the perfect blend of concern and authority. You've been off your psychiatric medications for days. Nothing you're seeing is real. For a terrifying moment, Jessica almost believed her. The drugs in her system, the memory gaps, the fog that had clouded her thinking for weeks. What if Eleanor was right? What if Jessica's breakdown had been worse than she realized? Then she remembered the files in Eleanor's bedroom, the medical equipment, the documentation of 11 previous treatments. I saw Margaret Chen's file, Jessica said. The woman who lived in my apartment before me. You killed her. Eleanor's mask slipped for just an instant, a flash of cold calculation before the concerned expression returned. Margaret died of natural causes, dear. Heart failure, very common in women her age. Eleanor took a step closer. You're creating connections that don't exist. It's a symptom of your condition. Then explain the medical equipment, the syringes, the death certificates you forged. Jessica, there's no medical equipment in my apartment, just the basic first aid supplies any responsible person keeps on hand. Eleanor's tone remained patient, but she continued moving closer. When the police arrive, they'll see a confused woman making wild accusations against her elderly neighbor. Is that really how you want this to end? Sirens were approaching, growing louder. Jessica realized Eleanor was right about one thing. When the police arrived, they'd see exactly what Eleanor wanted them to see. Eleanor had been building a case against Jessica's mental stability for weeks. Documentation, witness testimony from Jessica's own sister, evidence of erratic behavior. Unless Jessica could prove Eleanor's crimes before the police arrived. You're right, Jessica said, lowering her phone. I'm sorry. I've been confused lately. The medications you've been giving me have been helping, but... Of course they have, Eleanor said, relief evident in her voice. That's why it's so important to maintain your treatment schedule. Come down from there and we'll get you the help you need. Jessica moved away from the roof's edge, appearing to surrender. But as Eleanor approached with arms extended and a comforting gesture, Jessica ducked under her reach and ran for the roof access door. She had perhaps 60 seconds before the police arrived, and Eleanor could spin her narrative of delusional accusations. Jessica ran down the stairs 3 at a time, hearing Eleanor behind her shouting about Jessica's dangerous mental state. She reached Eleanor's apartment and kicked the door open, racing to the bedroom where the filing cabinets contained evidence of 11 murders. But the files were gone. The medical equipment had been moved. Eleanor's apartment looked exactly like what it claimed to be, the modest home of an elderly woman, with nothing more suspicious than a well-stocked first aid kit. Jessica stood in the empty bedroom, realizing the scope of Eleanor's preparation. She'd had contingency plans, backup stories, ways to make evidence disappear within minutes. The police sirens were in the building's parking lot now. Jessica ran to her own apartment, searching desperately for anything that could corroborate her story. But her symptoms journal showed carefully documented mental health deterioration. Her medicine cabinet contained prescription psychiatric medications she didn't remember taking. Her laptop browsing history showed research into suicide methods and paranoid conspiracy theories. Eleanor had been building a bulletproof case against Jessica's credibility for weeks. When the police knocked on her door, Jessica opened it to find 2 officers and Eleanor standing behind them, the picture of concerned elderly propriety. "Ms. Palmer?" The lead officer, a woman in her 40s with kind but tired eyes, spoke with practiced calm. "I'm Officer Martinez. We received a call about a medical emergency." "She's been having episodes," Eleanor interjected gently, wringing her hands with apparent distress. "I've been trying to help her, but she's been off her medications. Tonight she climbed onto the roof claiming I was trying to hurt her." Officer Martinez studied Jessica's appearance, disheveled, wild-eyed, trembling with adrenaline, and Jessica could see the assessment forming. Mentally ill woman, elderly caregiver, false alarm. "Ma'am, your neighbor says you've been having some difficulties lately?" Jessica forced herself to speak calmly, clinically. "Officer, I'm a registered nurse with 6 years of emergency medicine experience. Eleanor Voss has been systematically poisoning me with benzodiazepines and other controlled substances. She's murdered at least 11 people in the past 3 years using the same methodology." "Jessica, dear," Eleanor's voice carried heartbroken patience. "You know that's not true. You've been struggling since your breakdown at the hospital. I've only been trying to help." "Check her apartment," Jessica insisted. "Medical equipment, stolen pharmaceuticals, files documenting previous victims." Officer Martinez exchanged a glance with her partner. "Mrs. Voss, would you mind if we took a look around your apartment?" "Of course not, though I should warn you, Jessica's been fixated on these delusions for days. I was hoping her psychiatrist could adjust her medications before it came to this." They climbed to Eleanor's apartment, and Jessica's heart sank. The space was exactly as Eleanor had described. A modest, elderly woman's home with basic furnishings, family photographs, and nothing more suspicious than an extensive spice rack in the kitchen. "Where's the medical equipment?" Jessica demanded, searching frantically. "The IV pumps, the cardiac monitors, the filing cabinets." "Jessica," Eleanor said sadly, "there never was any medical equipment. You've been seeing things that aren't there." Officer Martinez was examining Jessica with growing concern. "Ms. Palmer, when was the last time you slept? Eaten a full meal?" Jessica realized how she must look. Malnourished, exhausted, displaying classic signs of acute psychiatric distress. Eleanor's poisoning had created the perfect cover story. "I know how this looks," Jessica said desperately. "But I'm telling you, this woman is a serial killer. Check missing persons reports for this neighborhood. Check death certificates for unusual patterns." "We'll look into it," Officer Martinez said in the tone police use to placate delusional individuals. "But right now, I'm concerned about your immediate safety. Do you have family we can call?" "I already contacted her sister in Seattle," Eleanor provided helpfully. "Sarah Chen. She's been worried about Jessica's condition for weeks." "No," Jessica said, panic rising. "Don't call Sarah. Eleanor's been manipulating her, getting personal information. Ma'am, I need you to calm down." Officer Martinez's hand moved subtly toward her service weapon. "You're showing signs of acute paranoid ideation. We need to get you medical attention." Jessica realized she was trapped in Eleanor's perfect trap. Every symptom of the poisoning could be attributed to mental illness. Every piece of evidence had been removed or explained away. Eleanor had spent weeks building an unshakable narrative of Jessica's psychological deterioration. "Officer Martinez," Eleanor said quietly, "I hate to suggest this, but Jessica has been researching suicide methods online. I found the browser history yesterday and I've been afraid to leave her alone." Jessica's blood turned to ice. She hadn't researched suicide methods, but Eleanor had access to her laptop during the memory blackouts. Creating false browser histories would be trivial. "Is that true, Ms. Palmer? Have you been having thoughts of hurting yourself?" The question was a trap. "Answer yes," And she'd be committed for psychiatric evaluation under Eleanor's influence. Answer no, and she'd look like she was lying about easily verifiable evidence. I haven't, Jessica began, then stopped. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of something that made her heart race with hope. Eleanor had been so focused on removing the obvious evidence that she'd missed something small but crucial. On the kitchen counter, partially hidden behind a coffee canister, sat a small glass vial with a medical label, the kind used for injectable medications. "Officer Martinez," Jessica said carefully, "I understand why you think I'm delusional, but I'm asking you to do one simple test. That vial behind the coffee canister, run a toxicology screen on whatever's inside. If it's harmless kitchen supplies like Eleanor claims, then I'll voluntarily commit myself for psychiatric evaluation." Eleanor's eyes flicked to the counter, and for just an instant, her composed mask slipped. "I don't know what that is," she said quickly. "Probably just vanilla extract or—" "Then you won't mind if we test it," Officer Martinez said, her cop instincts finally engaged by Eleanor's sudden nervousness. The second officer retrieved the vial, reading the label. "Midazolam. That's a controlled substance. Heavy-duty sedative." "I don't know how that got there," Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its assured calm. Someone must have planted it. Officer Martinez was now studying Eleanor with new interest. "Ma'am, do you have a prescription for this medication?" I'm sure there's an explanation." Jessica felt a surge of vindication. One piece of evidence. It wasn't enough to prove Eleanor's entire operation, but it was enough to shift the narrative from delusional woman to something suspicious is happening here. "Officer, if you test my blood right now, you'll find traces of that same medication. Benzodiazepines, hypnotics, probably other compounds I can't identify. Eleanor's been dosing me for weeks." "That's impossible," Eleanor protested, but she was losing control of the situation. "Jessica's been taking prescribed psychiatric medications. Any drugs in her system would be from legitimate treatment." "Then let's go to the hospital and find out," Officer Martinez said. "Ms. Palmer, are you willing to submit to blood work?" "Absolutely." "Mrs. Voss, we're going to need you to come with us as well. For questioning." Eleanor's composure finally cracked completely. "This is absurd. I'm a 72-year-old retired nurse being accused of nonsense by a mentally ill woman. I demand to call my lawyer." "You're certainly entitled to do that," Officer Martinez said. "But right now we're going to sort out exactly what's been happening in this building." As they led Eleanor toward the door, Jessica caught a glimpse of the older woman's face. The mask of kindly concern had vanished entirely, replaced by cold calculation and barely contained rage. "This isn't over, Jessica," Eleanor said quietly as they passed in the hallway. "You have no idea what you've started." 3 hours later, Jessica sat in a hospital bed watching Dr. Sarah Kim review her toxicology results with growing amazement. "I've never seen a combination like this," Dr. Kim said. "Midazolam, lorazepam, scopolamine, and at least 3 other compounds I can't immediately identify. Someone's been systematically drugging you with a cocktail designed to cause memory loss, confusion, and increased suggestibility. How long before it's completely out of my system?" "Another 24-48 hours for full clearance, but Jessica, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This is sophisticated pharmaceutical manipulation, professional-level knowledge." Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Palmer, we need to talk." Jessica's heart sank. "Did you find anything else in Eleanor's apartment?" "Actually, yes. After obtaining a proper search warrant, we discovered a hidden panel in her bedroom closet. Behind it was a complete medical facility, IV equipment, surgical instruments, and enough controlled substances to stock a pharmacy." Jessica closed her eyes with relief. "And the files?" "Still working on that. Eleanor had time to destroy most of the documentation before we secured the scene. But we found something interesting in her personal effects." Officer Martinez held up an old leather appointment book. Eleanor Voss kept meticulous records of her patients going back 3 years. Names, addresses, treatment protocols, and outcomes. It reads like a serial killer's trophy collection. "How many?" "We're still counting." but it looks like you were intended to be number 12. The investigation that followed would eventually link Eleanor Voss to 14 deaths across 3 states. Her method was always the same: target vulnerable individuals, establish herself as a caregiver, gradually increase their dependency through chemical manipulation, then cause natural deaths that rarely aroused suspicion. Eleanor had been a psychiatric nurse for 40 years before losing her license for unauthorized experimentation on patients. Rather than stop practicing medicine, she'd simply moved her operations into the community, using rental properties and fake identities to continue her work. 6 months later, Jessica testified at Eleanor's trial, describing the systematic way she'd been isolated, drugged, and prepared for murder. Eleanor showed no remorse, maintaining that she'd been providing mercy care to suffering individuals. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on 12 counts of first-degree murder. But as Jessica left the courthouse that day, she couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's work wasn't finished. During the trial, evidence had emerged of a network of former psychiatric professionals who shared Eleanor's philosophy about helping vulnerable people transition out of life. Jessica had survived Eleanor Voss, but she'd also learned that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the people we trust most to heal us. She moved back to Seattle, returned to nursing with a specialization in patient advocacy, and dedicated her life to developing protocols for identifying medical abuse. But she never again accepted help from well-meaning strangers, never again trusted that someone's concern for her well-being was genuine. Eleanor Voss had taught her that in a world where caregivers could become predators, the most dangerous words anyone could hear were, "Let me take care of you." The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when Marcus Reed found the listing. Victorian home studio space, perfect for creative professionals. Historic Salem property with exceptional acoustics. Serious inquiries only. Marcus stared at his laptop screen in the cramped hotel room that had been his home for 3 weeks. Ever since Anna had changed the locks and filed for custody of their 8-year-old daughter Emma, the betrayal still felt raw. Coming home early from a recording session to find Anna with his former business partner David, their entangled bodies a symphony of destruction that had shattered his marriage and his music career in one devastating moment. The studio space photos looked like salvation. A converted attic with exposed beams, hardwood floors, and windows that caught afternoon light like something from a film set. The price was almost too good to be true, $400 a month for what appeared to be a professional-grade setup in one of New England's most expensive areas. Marcus called the number immediately. Dr. Nathaniel Crane speaking. The voice was cultured, precise, with the kind of educated cadence that belonged in university lecture halls. "I'm calling about the studio rental. Is it still available?" "Ah, a musician, I presume. What's your instrument of choice?" "I'm a composer. Film scores, mostly indie projects. I work primarily with digital audio workstations, but I play piano." A pause. "Fascinating. And what draws you to my particular property, Mr. Reed, Marcus Reed? I need somewhere quiet to work, and your listing mentioned exceptional acoustics." "Indeed it does. Tell me, Mr. Reed, are you familiar with the concept of resonant frequency? The idea that every space, every object, every emotion has its own unique sonic signature?" Marcus frowned at the philosophical direction of the conversation. "I understand basic acoustics, yes." "Excellent. When can you come view the space? I have a feeling you'll find it inspiring." 2 hours later, Marcus stood before a towering Victorian house that belonged in a Gothic novel. 3 stories of dark wood and elaborate gingerbread trim, with narrow windows that seemed to watch the street like hooded eyes. The property sat on a corner lot, separated from its neighbors by enough distance to ensure privacy. Dr. Nathaniel Crane answered the door before Marcus could knock, a tall, angular man with silver hair swept back from a high forehead and wire-rimmed glasses that magnified intelligent gray eyes. He wore a burgundy smoking jacket over pressed slacks as if he'd stepped from another century. "Mr. Reed, punctual. I appreciate that in an artist." Crane's handshake was firm, his fingers long and surprisingly strong for a man who appeared to be in his late 60s. "Please come in." The interior was a marvel of preserved Victorian architecture. Dark wood paneling climbed the walls, while Persian rugs muffled their footsteps on polished hardwood floors. The air smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and something else Marcus couldn't identify. Something organic and slightly sweet. "The house has been in my family for generations," Crane explained as he led Marcus through a maze of narrow hallways. "My great-grandfather was a composer himself. He designed the acoustics with mathematical precision." As if to demonstrate, Crane clapped his hands once. The sound didn't echo. It seemed to bloom, expanding through the space with unusual clarity before fading into perfect silence. The walls contained specific proportions of horsehair and plaster. Crane continued, noting Marcus's surprise. "Sound behaves differently here, more intimately." They climbed a narrow staircase that creaked melodically under their weight, each step producing a different tone. The second floor contained what appeared to be living quarters, a kitchen, sitting room, and bedrooms that Crane gestured toward but didn't enter. "I live quite simply," he explained. "My true passion has always been the study of sound itself, the way it carries emotion, memory, the very essence of human experience." The staircase to the third floor was even narrower, barely wide enough for one person. At the top, Crane opened a heavy wooden door with an old-fashioned skeleton key. The attic studio took Marcus's breath away. The space was enormous, running the length of the house with cathedral ceilings that soared 20 feet overhead. Afternoon light streamed through dormer windows, illuminating a collection of musical equipment that belonged in a museum. A 1920s Steinway grand piano dominated the center of the room, its ebony surface reflecting the warm wood of the exposed beams. Vintage synthesizers lined one wall, Moogs and ARPs that Marcus had only seen in photographs. Professional recording equipment filled custom-built shelves, reel-to-reel tape machines, tube preamps, and mixing boards that would cost more than most people's cars. "My God," Marcus whispered, approaching the piano. He pressed middle C, and the note rang with crystalline purity that seemed to hang in the air forever. "Perfect pitch," Crane observed with satisfaction. "The room's design amplifies certain frequencies while absorbing others. It creates an ideal environment for pure expression." Marcus wandered the space in amazement, running his fingers over equipment he'd dreamed of using. Everything was meticulously maintained, professionally calibrated, ready for immediate use. "Dr. Crane, this setup must be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why rent it for so little?" Crane moved to one of the windows, gazing out at the Salem Street below. "Money has never motivated me, Mr. Reed. I'm interested in something far more valuable, the pursuit of authentic musical expression. Tell me, what drives your composition? What emotions do you seek to capture?" The question hit unexpectedly deep. Marcus found himself talking about his recent work, the way he'd been exploring themes of loss and betrayal since Anna left. Crane listened with the focused attention of a therapist, occasionally asking probing questions about Marcus's creative process. "Pain," Crane said finally, "is perhaps the most honest emotion humans experience. It strips away pretense, reveals the raw truth beneath our civilized facades. Have you considered that your recent trauma might be the key to your greatest work?" The words were uncomfortably perceptive. Marcus had been avoiding his emotions, trying to compose despite them, rather than through them. "The rental terms are simple," Crane continued. $400 monthly, access to all equipment, complete privacy for your work. In exchange, I ask only that you allow me occasional visits to discuss your progress. I'm writing a book on the relationship between trauma and musical creativity. Your insights could prove invaluable." Marcus felt a flutter of unease at the idea of his work being studied, but the opportunity was too incredible to refuse. The divorce lawyer's fees were mounting, and his freelance income had dried up since his professional reputation had taken a hit from the David situation. "When could I move in?" "Immediately, if you like. I'll have a key made." Crane's smile was warm, grandfatherly. "I have a feeling you're going to create something extraordinary here, Mr. Reed. Something that will capture the true essence of human experience." As they shook hands, sealing the agreement, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Crane's grip lingered a moment too long, and that the older man's eyes held an intensity that went beyond academic interest. But the studio was perfect, the price was right, and Marcus desperately needed a place to rebuild his life and career. He ignored the small voice in his head that whispered warnings about deals that seemed too good to be true. 3 hours later, Marcus carried his equipment up the narrow staircase, already imagining the music he would create in this perfect sonic environment. The late afternoon light cast long shadows through the attic windows, and somewhere in the walls of the old house he could swear he heard the faintest echo of distant music, melodies that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. Dr. Nathaniel Crane watched from his first-floor window as Marcus made trip after trip to his car, each load bringing more equipment into the house. When Marcus disappeared inside for the final time, Crane opened a leather journal and wrote in precise handwriting, Subject number 47, Marcus Reed, composer, age 34. Recent traumatic divorce, estranged from daughter, career in decline, perfect emotional vulnerability. Musical background will make this collection particularly rich. Estimated timeline for optimal extraction, 6-8 weeks. He closed the journal and smiled. After 18 months without a proper subject, Dr. Nathaniel Crane was ready to begin composing his next symphony of human suffering. The real music was about to begin. Marcus fell into the rhythm of the house like a musician finding the beat. He worked primarily at night, when Salem streets grew quiet and the old Victorian seemed to come alive with its own subtle symphony. The whisper of wind through eaves, the melodic creak of settling timber, the distant hum of heating pipes that carried through the walls like the breathing of some vast organism. The music came easier than it had in months. Marcus found himself composing with an intensity he hadn't felt since his early 20s, when every melody felt like a revelation waiting to be discovered. The divorce papers sat forgotten on his dresser as he lost himself in progressions that seemed to flow directly from the house's unique acoustics. Dr. Crane had been right about the space. It transformed everything. Notes hung in the air with unusual clarity, allowing Marcus to hear harmonic relationships he'd never noticed before. The vintage equipment responded to his touch like living instruments, each synthesizer and preamp adding its own character to his compositions. Crane himself proved to be an attentive but unobtrusive landlord. He appeared each morning around 10 with coffee and pastries from a local bakery, always eager to discuss Marcus's progress. The creative process fascinates me, Crane explained during one of these visits, settling into the antique chair he'd positioned near the piano, particularly the relationship between emotional state and artistic output. How does one capture authentic feeling in digital form? Marcus found himself opening up to the older man in ways that surprised him. Crane was an excellent listener, asking probing questions about Marcus's compositional techniques, his emotional state, the specific moments when inspiration struck strongest. I've been experimenting with minor sevenths, Marcus said, demonstrating a progression on the piano. There's something about that interval that perfectly captures the feeling of loss. Ah yes, the devil's interval, Crane nodded knowingly. Medieval theorists believed it could drive listeners to madness. Perhaps they understood something about frequency and emotion that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Their conversations often took these philosophical turns. Crane had theories about music that went far beyond academic discourse. He spoke of sound as a fundamental force, capable of manipulating matter and consciousness in ways that conventional physics couldn't explain. Every emotion has its own resonant frequency, Crane explained one particularly memorable morning. Fear vibrates at roughly 19 hertz, below the threshold of conscious hearing, but perfectly capable of inducing panic. Love resonates at 528 hertz, which some call the miracle frequency. Understanding these relationships allows a composer to bypass rational thought and speak directly to the human soul. Marcus was skeptical of the more esoteric claims, but he couldn't deny that his music was evolving in unexpected directions. His recent compositions had a darker edge, exploring themes of isolation and paranoia that felt both deeply personal and somehow universal. It was during the third week that Marcus first noticed the house's stranger acoustic properties. He was working late around 2 a.m. when he heard what sounded like a conversation coming from the floor below. The voices were indistinct but clearly agitated, a man and woman arguing about something urgent. Marcus paused his work, listening more carefully, but the sounds faded before he could make out specific words. When he mentioned it to Crane the next morning, the older man showed no surprise. "Ah, yes, the house's architectural quirks. The way sound travels through these walls can be quite unpredictable. Conversations from the street sometimes echo through the heating ducts, creating the illusion that voices are coming from inside the building." The explanation seemed reasonable, but Marcus began paying closer attention to the house's sonic environment. He noticed that his footsteps in the studio sometimes seemed to echo from impossible directions, behind him when he was walking forward, or from the floor above when no one else was in the building. Late at night, he heard what sounded like scratching inside the walls as if someone were trying to claw their way out. Most unsettling were the dreams that began during his 4th week in the house. Marcus would fall asleep at his workstation, exhausted from long composition sessions, only to wake with the memory of sounds that couldn't have been real, screams of anguish that seemed to come from the house itself, whispered confessions in languages he didn't recognize, the sound of someone crying with such profound despair that it made his chest ache with sympathetic pain. "Fascinating," Crane said when Marcus described these experiences. "You're clearly developing a heightened sensitivity to the house's acoustic environment. This could be tremendously valuable for your compositional work. Have you considered incorporating these nocturnal experiences into your music?" The suggestion felt both intriguing and vaguely disturbing. Marcus had always composed from emotion, but the sounds in his dreams carried a quality of authentic human suffering that felt too raw to exploit artistically. Still, he found himself experimenting with audio recorded during his sleep sessions. He'd started leaving his equipment running overnight, hoping to capture evidence of the strange acoustics Crane described. What he found on the recordings was deeply unsettling. His own breathing and occasional movement were clearly audible, but underneath these familiar sounds was something else, a layer of audio that seemed to exist just below the threshold of perception. When he amplified and filtered these sections, he could make out what sounded like fragments of conversation, distant music, and occasional sounds that might have been sobbing or screaming. Probably just interference from radio signals or electronic equipment, Marcus told himself, but the rational explanation felt hollow. There was something organic about these sounds, something unmistakably human in their emotional content. When he showed the recordings to Crane, the older man's reaction was more intense than Marcus expected. "May I borrow these files?" Crane asked, his gray eyes bright with interest. "I'd like to analyze them with some specialized equipment I have downstairs. This could be exactly the type of phenomenon I've been documenting." Marcus agreed, though something about Crane's eagerness made him uneasy. The older man seemed less interested in solving the mystery of the sounds than in studying their emotional impact on Marcus himself. That night, Marcus dreamed he was trapped inside a vast musical instrument, a pipe organ made of human bone, with keys that screamed when depressed and stops that released the anguished cries of the dead. He woke to find his composition software running, having somehow recorded 6 hours of audio while he slept. When he played back the recording, he heard his own voice, speaking in a tone of profound despair about Anna's betrayal, about his failures as a husband and father, about his growing certainty that he would never create anything meaningful again. It was like listening to his own confession, recorded without his knowledge or consent. But he had no memory of speaking these words, no recollection of the emotional breakdown the recording captured in painful detail. Marcus stared at the audio waveform on his computer screen, realizing that something in the house was extracting his deepest fears and playing them back to him in his own voice. And somewhere below his studio, Dr. Nathaniel Crane was listening to every word, adding Marcus's unconscious confessions to a collection that spanned decades of human suffering. The symphony was building toward its crescendo, and Marcus Reed was about to become its most important movement. By his 5th week in the Victorian house, Marcus had lost 12 pounds and developed a persistent tremor in his left hand that made precise keyboard work increasingly difficult. His sleep schedule had dissolved into something that couldn't be called a schedule at all. He would work for 18 hours straight, then collapse into unconsciousness that felt more like drowning than rest. The music he was creating had evolved into something unrecognizable from his previous work. Gone were the carefully structured film scores with their calculated emotional beats. In their place emerged compositions that seemed to write themselves, dark, serpentine melodies that twisted through harmonic progressions he'd never studied, but somehow understood intuitively. Dr. Crane's morning visits had become the only consistent marker of time's passage, though even these encounters felt increasingly surreal. The older man would appear with mathematical precision at 10:15 a.m., bearing coffee that tasted slightly bitter despite its obvious quality, and pastries that Marcus rarely remembered eating. "Your work is evolving remarkably," Crane observed during one such visit, reviewing the previous night's compositions on Marcus's computer. "This piece particularly interests me, the way you've layered subsonic frequencies beneath the primary melody. Most listeners won't consciously hear those lower registers, but they'll feel them physiologically. Increased heart rate, elevated cortisol production, a generalized sense of unease." Marcus stared at the waveform display, confused. "I don't remember adding subsonic elements." "Ah, but you did. Look here." Crane pointed to sections of the spectrum analysis that showed frequency content below 20 Hz. "These infrasonic components are precisely calibrated to induce anxiety responses, quite sophisticated for unconscious composition." The conversation left Marcus deeply unsettled. He'd been experiencing episodes of what he called lost time, periods where he would begin working on a simple melody, only to discover hours later that he'd created complex orchestral arrangements with no memory of the intervening composition process. More disturbing were the technical elements appearing in his work that exceeded his knowledge of audio engineering. His recent pieces incorporated advanced psychoacoustic principles, binaural beats, frequency masking, and harmonic distortion techniques that he'd never studied but somehow executed flawlessly. "Perhaps you're accessing deeper creative resources," Crane suggested when Marcus expressed concern about these blackout periods. "Trauma often unlocks hidden potentials. Your subconscious mind may be processing musical concepts your rational mind hasn't yet grasped." But Marcus was beginning to suspect something more sinister was happening during his memory gaps. Equipment settings would change overnight, EQ curves adjusted, reverb parameters modified, compressor thresholds altered in ways that seemed designed to capture specific types of audio content. Sometimes he would find new recordings on his hard drive, sessions he couldn't remember initiating that contained fragments of his own voice in various states of emotional distress. One particularly unsettling discovery was a collection of files buried deep in his system's directory structure. When he opened them, he found hours of audio that appeared to be recorded conversations, intimate discussions between people he didn't recognize, talking about personal traumas, confessing secrets, sharing their deepest fears. The quality was too clear for these to be accidental radio interference. Someone had deliberately recorded these conversations using professional equipment, then hidden the files where only a thorough system search would uncover them. "Dr. Crane," Marcus said during the next morning visit, "I found some audio files on my computer that I didn't create. They seem to be recordings of private conversations." Crane's reaction was immediate and intense, a flash of something predatory crossing his features before his usual grandfatherly concern returned. How curious. Perhaps previous tenants left files on the system? This equipment has been used by several musicians over the years. I should help you clean those out. We wouldn't want to compromise your storage space. But when Crane reached for Marcus's laptop, Marcus pulled it away. "I'd like to understand where they came from first. Some of these recordings are very personal. If someone's privacy was violated..." Of course. Privacy is paramount." Crane's smile was tight. "Though I wonder if you might be overthinking this. Creative minds often perceive patterns and conspiracies where none exist. The isolation of artistic work can play tricks on perception." The dismissal felt condescending, and Marcus found himself studying Crane more carefully during their conversations. The older man's knowledge of audio engineering was remarkably specific for a musicologist. His questions about Marcus's emotional state were clinically precise. Most unsettling was the way Crane seemed to know details about Marcus's work that hadn't been shared. Specific chord progressions, lyrical content, even the timing of his creative breakthroughs. That night, Marcus decided to conduct an experiment. He set up his most sensitive recording equipment and left it running while he pretended to work on a new composition. Instead of composing, he spoke freely about his suspicions regarding Crane, his concern about the house's strange acoustics, and his growing conviction that something unnatural was happening in the Victorian mansion. When he reviewed the recording the next morning, he discovered something that made his blood freeze. His voice was clearly audible, but so was something else. A second audio track that seemed to be running in parallel, capturing the same conversation from a different microphone source. The perspective and frequency response suggested this second recording was coming from equipment hidden elsewhere in the room. Marcus spent the morning conducting a systematic search of his studio. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Tiny, professional-grade microphones were concealed throughout the space, behind picture frames inside heating vents even built into the antique furniture Crane had provided. The installation was so sophisticated, it would have required extensive acoustic engineering knowledge and significant financial resources. Someone had been recording every sound Marcus made since moving into the house. When Crane arrived for his usual visit, Marcus was waiting with printouts of the spectrum analyses that proved the existence of hidden surveillance equipment. "Doctor, Crane, I need you to explain what's happening in this house." Crane examined the papers with interest rather than surprise. "Remarkable detective work, Mr. Reed. You have quite a talent for audio forensics. You're not denying it?" "Why would I deny something so obvious? Of course the house is monitored. Did you think I would allow expensive equipment to remain unsupervised? The insurance requirements alone necessitate comprehensive security measures." The casual admission was somehow more disturbing than an outright lie would have been. "You've been recording my private conversations, my personal confessions, my creative process. I've been documenting the relationship between environment and artistic output. Your work here represents a unique case study in trauma-induced creativity. The recordings serve an academic purpose." Marcus felt his hands beginning to shake. "Academic purpose? You've been violating my privacy for weeks." "Privacy is an illusion, Mr. Reed. Every word you speak, every emotion you feel, every note you compose, it all becomes part of the acoustic environment. I'm simply preserving that environment for study." Crane's calm rationalization was more terrifying than anger would have been. Marcus realized he was dealing with someone whose moral framework operated on completely different principles than normal human ethics. "I'm leaving," Marcus said. "Today. I want nothing more to do with this place." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Crane replied, his voice maintaining its grandfatherly warmth even as his words carried unmistakable threat. "You see, Mr. Reed, your work here isn't finished. We've only just begun to explore the true depths of your creative potential." As if responding to some invisible signal, the house's audio system activated. Speakers Marcus hadn't noticed before began emitting a low-frequency tone that made his vision blur and his stomach clench with nausea. The subsonic frequency was precisely calibrated to induce panic, and Marcus felt his rational mind dissolving under its influence. "Don't fight it," Crane advised kindly. "The frequency I'm using is specifically tuned to your neurological profile. Resistance will only amplify the discomfort." Marcus tried to move toward the door, but the subsonic assault made coordination impossible. His legs felt weak, his breathing became labored, and a crushing sense of dread overwhelmed his ability to think clearly. "You see," Crane continued, his voice somehow clearly audible despite the audio chaos filling the room. "I've spent decades perfecting the relationship between sound and human consciousness. Every person has a unique acoustic signature, a combination of frequencies that can unlock their deepest emotions, bypass their psychological defenses, and access the pure, unfiltered essence of their experience." The room began to spin, and Marcus collapsed onto the antique chair, unable to support his own weight against the subsonic barrage. "Your signature is particularly complex, Mr. Reed. The trauma of your divorce created harmonic distortions in your emotional spectrum that make you exceptionally responsive to acoustic manipulation. With the proper frequencies, I can induce any emotional state, extract any memory, capture any sound your vocal cords are capable of producing. Through the haze of induced panic, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what he'd stumbled into. Dr. Nathaniel Crane wasn't just a voyeur collecting private moments. He was a predator who used sound itself as a weapon, turning the house into an acoustic torture chamber designed to extract the most intimate sounds of human suffering. And Marcus Reed had just become his latest instrument. The subsonic assault ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving Marcus gasping on the antique chair while Dr. Crane observed his recovery with clinical detachment. The older man made notes in a leather journal, documenting Marcus's physiological responses with the methodical precision of a researcher conducting controlled experiments. "Fascinating," Crane murmured. "Your autonomic nervous system shows remarkable sensitivity to infrasonic manipulation. The 19 Hz frequency I employed triggered textbook panic responses, elevated heart rate, respiratory distress, cognitive disruption. But you maintained consciousness throughout. Most subjects lose awareness within 60 seconds. Marcus struggled to regulate his breathing, fighting against the residual terror that clung to his nervous system like static electricity. What do you want from me?" "I want to complete our symphony, Mr. Reed. Your emotional range and musical training make you an ideal subject for my final composition, a piece that will capture the complete spectrum of human suffering and transform it into transcendent art." Crane moved to a section of the wall that Marcus hadn't noticed before, pressing against what appeared to be ordinary wood paneling. A hidden door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Come, it's time you saw the full scope of my work." When Marcus hesitated, Crane activated another hidden speaker, this one emitting a frequency that made Marcus's bones ache and his teeth feel like they were vibrating apart. The pain was immediate and unbearable, forcing him to comply simply to make it stop. The basement was a revelation of horror that exceeded Marcus's darkest imaginings. The space had been converted into a sophisticated recording studio that made his upstairs setup look like amateur equipment. Professional-grade mixing boards lined the walls, connected to banks of tape machines, digital recorders, and audio processing equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it was the organization of the collection that made Marcus's stomach lurch with comprehension. Metal shelving units covered every available wall space, each shelf containing hundreds of carefully labeled recordings. The labeling system was horrifyingly precise. Marital betrayal, acute phase, terminal diagnosis, initial response, child loss, 6-month progression, physical torture, extended session. Marcus moved through the collection like a man walking through his own nightmare. The recordings spanned decades, documented in multiple formats: reel-to-reel tapes from the 1970s, cassettes from the 1980s and 90s, CDs from the early 2000s, and digital files from recent years. Each label included a date, duration, and clinical assessment of the emotional content. "My life's work," Crane explained proudly. "The most comprehensive archive of authentic human suffering ever assembled. Each recording captures moments of absolute truth, times when civilized pretense dissolves and people express their deepest, most primal emotions." Marcus pulled a cassette at random. Jennifer M., age 29. Last words, accidental overdose, 23 minutes. The clinical description of what was clearly someone's death made him feel physically sick. "You murdered these people." "I preserved their essence," Crane corrected. "Death is simply the ultimate expression of human experience. The sounds people make in their final moments, the gasps, the whispered regrets, the desperate prayers. These are the purest communications our species produces." Marcus continued through the collection, each label revealing new depths of horror. Domestic violence, real-time documentation. Psychiatric break, induced psychosis phase. Torture session, multiple subjects, live recording. The scope was staggering. Crane had been operating for at least 30 years, collecting sounds of human suffering with the methodical dedication of a scholar building a library. But it was the final section that broke Marcus's remaining composure. A wall of recordings labeled Tenants Studio Sessions contained hundreds of files documenting previous occupants of the attic studio. Marcus recognized the progression. Each subject started with innocent compositions, gradually degrading into emotional breakdowns as Crane's manipulation took effect. The final recordings in each sequence were invariably labeled terminal session, with durations that suggested prolonged suffering. "You're looking at my greatest artistic achievement," Crane said, gesturing toward a massive reel-to-reel machine in the center of the room. 30 years of human vocal expression, arranged into a single symphonic composition, the requiem for the human condition, 6 hours of pure, unfiltered human truth. Marcus approached the machine with horrified fascination. The tape reels were enormous, clearly custom manufactured to accommodate the extended composition. A simple placard identified the work: Symphony in D minor, the human frequency. Duration, 6:17:43, featuring 847 individual vocal subjects. 847 people, Marcus whispered. 846, Crane corrected. You will be the final voice, the crescendo that brings the work to its ultimate conclusion. Your musical training makes you uniquely qualified to understand what we're creating together. Marcus felt reality tilting around him as he comprehended the true scope of Crane's madness. This wasn't random violence or even serial killing in any conventional sense. This was systematic harvesting of human vocal expression, conducted with the methodical precision of an industrial operation. The beauty of my system, Crane continued, moving to another bank of equipment, is its sustainability. The house serves as both laboratory and collection facility. Tenants provide weeks or months of preliminary material, conversations, creative sessions, gradual psychological deterioration. Then, when they've contributed everything their stable minds can offer, we proceed to the terminal phase. Crane activated a monitor showing a schematic of the Victorian house. Marcus could see the layout of hidden microphones, speakers, and acoustic manipulation equipment that turned the entire structure into a massive audio capture system. Every room is acoustically optimized for different types of recording. The bedroom captures intimate conversations and nightmare vocalizations. The kitchen documents domestic stress and relationship conflicts. The bathroom provides excellent reverb for screams and pleading. And your studio, Crane smiled with paternal pride. The studio is designed to slowly drive occupants to complete psychological breakdown while recording their entire creative process. Marcus stared at the schematic, understanding for the first time that his weeks of increasing paranoia, his lost time episodes, his growing mental instability, all of it had been deliberately orchestrated using carefully calibrated acoustic manipulation. The subsonic frequencies I've been exposing you to create a state of chronic stress that amplifies emotional responses. The infrasonic generators in your studio walls operate below conscious perception, but have profound effects on neurochemistry. After weeks of exposure, subjects become hypersensitive to additional manipulation. Crane moved to a computer terminal and pulled up audio files labeled with Marcus's name. The collection was staggeringly comprehensive. Every conversation, every composition session, every moment of private anguish Marcus had experienced in the house had been captured and cataloged. Your progression has been exemplary, Crane noted, scrolling through the files. Initial creative enthusiasm, gradual paranoia development, increasing isolation, memory deterioration, and now the final phase, complete understanding of your situation combined with total helplessness to change it. Marcus felt the walls of the basement closing in around him as he realized that his discovery of Crane's activities hadn't been accidental. It had been orchestrated as part of the terminal phase, designed to produce the specific emotional responses that would complete Crane's symphony. Please, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible in the acoustically perfect basement. My daughter, she needs her father. Crane paused in his documentation, turning to study Marcus with renewed interest. Ah, yes, Emma. 8 years old, currently living with your ex-wife Anna in Portland. You've mentioned her frequently during your sleep sessions. Quite moving material, actually. The guilt of an absent father makes for remarkably poignant vocalizations. The casual mention of his daughter's name and details made Marcus realize that Crane's surveillance had extended far beyond the confines of the Victorian house. This man had researched every aspect of Marcus's life, identified his deepest vulnerabilities, and was now using his love for Emma as another instrument of torture. "Don't worry about Emma," Crane continued kindly. "Children are remarkably resilient. She'll eventually forget the father who abandoned her for his art. The pain will fade, and she'll build a new life without the burden of your continued existence." The words were designed to maximize psychological damage, and they succeeded completely. Marcus felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Not just hope for escape, but his basic will to resist. Crane's manipulation was so complete, so precisely calibrated to his psychological profile, that fighting back felt not just futile but somehow contrary to the natural order. "There we are," Crane observed with satisfaction, watching Marcus's shoulders slump in defeat. "I can hear the change in your breathing, see the surrender in your posture. This is the moment I've been waiting for, when resistance transforms into acceptance, when the subject understands their role in something greater than themselves." Crane moved to the massive tape machine and began threading a fresh reel. "Your terminal session will be the culmination of my life's work, Mr. Reed. Together we'll create something that captures the absolute essence of human despair. 6 hours of guided vocal expression that will serve as the final movement of my symphony." The machine hummed to life, its recording heads aligning with mechanical precision. Marcus watched his own doom being prepared with the methodical care of a professional audio engineer, realizing that Dr. Nathaniel Crane was about to transform him into the final instrument in a symphony of human suffering that had been 30 years in the making. The real music was about to begin, and Marcus Reed would sing his last song into the darkness of the Victorian basement, adding his voice to the chorus of the dead that lived forever in Crane's perfect acoustic hell. The recording equipment hummed with anticipation as Dr. Crane made final adjustments to the massive tape machine. Marcus sat in the chair where 846 other people had spent their final hours, watching his captor prepare for what he called the terminal session, with the methodical precision of a concert conductor preparing for a performance. "We'll begin with simple vocal exercises," Crane explained, attaching electrodes to Marcus's temples that would monitor his neurological responses. "I've found that gradual escalation produces the most authentic emotional progression: fear, despair, rage, acceptance. Each phase generates its own unique vocal characteristics." Marcus tested his restraints one more time, knowing it was futile, but unable to suppress the basic human instinct to fight for survival. The leather straps were professionally installed, designed to prevent movement while allowing full respiratory function. Crane needed his subjects able to vocalize clearly throughout the entire process. But as Crane turned to activate the recording system, Marcus's musician's ear caught something the older man had missed: a subtle harmonic distortion in the basement's acoustic environment. The same frequencies Crane had been using to manipulate him were creating interference patterns with the house's hidden speaker system, generating what audio engineers called standing waves. Marcus had studied these phenomena during his film scoring work. In the right acoustic environment, standing waves could create zones where specific frequencies were amplified or completely canceled out. If he could identify the null points, the acoustic dead zones where Crane's manipulation frequencies wouldn't reach him, he might be able to think clearly enough to find an escape. "Let's begin with a simple vocalization," Crane instructed, activating what appeared to be a massive subwoofer hidden beneath the basement floor. "I want you to scream, Mr. Reed. Not in terror yet. We'll build to that. Just a practice scream so I can calibrate the recording levels." Instead of screaming, Marcus began to hum, a low, sustained note at precisely 440 Hz, the standard tuning frequency for musical instruments. The sound seemed to hang in the air of the basement, and Marcus could hear how it interacted with the room's acoustic properties. "Interesting choice," Crane observed, adjusting his equipment. "But I need vocal expression of pain, not musical theory." Marcus continued humming, slowly shifting through different frequencies while listening carefully to how each tone behaved in the space. His years of audio engineering experience had trained him to analyze acoustic environments by ear, identifying reflection patterns, absorption characteristics, and frequency responses that most people couldn't consciously perceive. There, At 237 hertz, his voice seemed to disappear entirely, swallowed by a null point in the room's standing wave pattern. The frequency was being canceled by destructive interference from Crane's own speaker system. "Mr. Reed, you're not cooperating with the process," Crane said with mild irritation, activating the subsonic generators that had induced panic attacks in the studio upstairs. But the manipulation frequencies couldn't reach Marcus at the null point where he was positioned. The same acoustic phenomenon that was canceling his 237 hertz hum was also neutralizing Crane's psychological weapons. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt his mind clearing of the artificial fog that had been clouding his judgment. He shifted his humming to different frequencies, using each tone to map the basement's acoustic environment. The room was a maze of standing waves, null points and amplification zones created by the interaction between Crane's hidden speakers and the natural resonance of the Victorian house's architecture. "Remarkable," Crane said, studying his monitoring equipment with confusion. "The neural feedback isn't registering any stress response. The subsonic generators should be inducing significant psychological distress." Marcus realized that Crane's reliance on acoustic manipulation had created a blind spot. The man was so confident in his technological control that he'd never considered the possibility of his own equipment being turned against him. Still humming his 237 hertz tone, Marcus began to test the limits of his restraints more systematically. The leather straps were designed to prevent gross motor movement, but they allowed enough flexibility for him to alter his position slightly within the chair. If he could shift his body just a few inches in any direction, he might be able to move out of the acoustic null point and into a zone where different frequencies were canceled. By positioning himself strategically within the room's standing wave pattern, he could potentially create a mobile dead zone that would protect him from Crane's manipulation while allowing him to move through the basement. "Your neural patterns are quite unusual," Crane continued, making adjustments to his equipment. "Most subjects show immediate autonomic responses to the subsonic stimulation. Perhaps we need to increase the amplitude." As Crane reached for the controls, Marcus made his move. He threw his weight to one side, tipping the chair and crashing to the floor in a position that put him in a different acoustic zone. The impact was painful, but he was now positioned where the room's 19 hertz panic frequency was being canceled by destructive interference. "Mr. Reed, you're damaging valuable equipment." Crane rushed toward Marcus, but his movement put him directly into one of the acoustic amplification zones Marcus had identified. The subsonic frequencies that should have been targeting Marcus were now concentrated on Crane himself, and the older man staggered as his own psychological weapons hit him with unexpected intensity. Marcus used the moment of confusion to work at his restraints. The chair had partially broken in the fall, loosening the mounting points for the leather straps. He could feel one of the buckles beginning to give way under the stress. "You don't understand what you're doing," Crane gasped, fighting against the disorientation caused by his own equipment. "The frequencies, they're not calibrated for my neurological profile. This could cause permanent damage." "Good," Marcus replied, finally freeing one arm from its restraint. He immediately began working on the strap holding his other arm, all while maintaining his position in the acoustic null zone that protected him from the subsonic assault. Crane stumbled toward the control panel, trying to shut down the speaker system. But the basement's acoustic environment was now working against him. Every movement put him in different zones where various frequencies were amplified or canceled, creating a constantly shifting pattern of psychological manipulation that his own mind couldn't adapt to. Marcus freed his second arm and began working on the leg restraints. The broken chair provided leverage that the original design hadn't accounted for, and he could feel the remaining straps beginning to give way. "You're making a terrible mistake," Crane warned, finally reaching the control panel. "Do you think escaping this basement means escaping me? The entire house is wired for acoustic control. The moment you leave this room, I can flood every space with frequencies that will drop you unconscious in seconds." But Marcus was counting on Crane's reliance on technology. He'd spent enough time in the house to understand its acoustic properties, and he had advantages that Crane's previous victims hadn't possessed: professional audio engineering knowledge and a musician's instinctive understanding of how sound behaved in different environments. He freed his legs and stood up, still humming his protective 237 hertz tone. The frequency would serve as his acoustic shield, creating a mobile null zone that would protect him from at least some of Crane's weapons as he moved through the house. "You can't maintain that vocalization indefinitely," Crane observed, his composure beginning to return as he moved away from the amplification zones. Human vocal cords fatigue quickly under sustained use. When your voice fails, you'll be completely vulnerable to acoustic manipulation. Crane was right about vocal fatigue, but Marcus had another advantage: his knowledge of the house's hidden speaker locations. During his weeks in the studio, he'd unconsciously cataloged every audio source, every acoustic anomaly, every point where sound seemed to originate from unexpected directions. He moved toward the basement stairs, maintaining his humming while staying in the acoustic shadows where Crane's frequencies were weakest. The older man tracked his movement, adjusting the speaker system to try to catch Marcus in a zone of amplification, but the Victorian house's chaotic architecture created too many variables for precise acoustic targeting. "Impressive, Mr. Reed," Crane admitted with what sounded like genuine admiration. "You're the first subject to demonstrate this level of acoustic awareness. It's almost enough to make me regret having to kill you." Marcus reached the basement stairs and began climbing, each step taking him closer to the main floor where he knew the acoustic environment would be different. The stairwell itself was a resonant chamber that would amplify his protective frequency while potentially disrupting some of Crane's hidden speakers. Behind him, he could hear Crane activating additional systems, flooding the basement with a chaos of conflicting frequencies designed to break down any remaining null zones. But Marcus was already moving beyond the range of the basement speakers, entering the house's main acoustic environment where different rules applied. The first floor was a maze of overlapping acoustic zones, each room tuned for different types of recording and manipulation. Marcus's weeks of unconscious observation paid off as he navigated toward the front door, avoiding the areas where he remembered experiencing the strongest psychological effects. His humming was beginning to strain his vocal cords, but he only needed to maintain it long enough to reach the exit. Freedom was perhaps 30 seconds away, if he could avoid Crane's remaining acoustic traps. "Mr. Reed," Crane's voice echoed through the house's intercom system. "You're being quite unreasonable. Think about what you're destroying. 30 years of irreplaceable acoustic research. The scientific value of my collection far outweighs any individual life." Marcus ignored the appeal and continued toward the front door, his protective frequency wavering as vocal fatigue set in. He could feel Crane's manipulation frequencies beginning to affect him at the edges of his acoustic shield, creating the first hints of the panic and disorientation that had controlled him for weeks. The front door was 20 feet away when Crane activated what must have been his final weapon, a system that flooded the entire first floor with a chaotic mixture of every frequency in his arsenal. The acoustic assault was overwhelming, designed to break through any possible defense through sheer volume and complexity. Marcus felt his protective humming falter as the subsonic attack hit him from multiple directions simultaneously. His vision blurred, his legs became unsteady, and the familiar terror began flooding his nervous system as Crane's frequencies found their targets. But he was close enough to the door to make one final desperate attempt. As his voice failed and the acoustic manipulation overwhelmed his defenses, Marcus threw himself forward with the last of his coordinated movement, his hand closing around the antique door handle just as consciousness began to slip away. The Victorian house's front door opened onto Salem's quiet residential street, and Marcus collapsed across the threshold into a world where Dr. Nathaniel Crane's acoustic weapons had no power. The night air was cold and clean, free of the subsonic frequencies that had been slowly driving him insane for weeks. Behind him, he could hear Crane's voice through the house's speaker system, no longer the cultured tones of a refined academic, but the frustrated rage of a predator whose perfect hunting ground had been compromised. "This isn't over, Mr. Reed. You have no idea what you've started. The police won't believe you. 30 years of careful reputation building against the word of a mentally unstable musician. I'll destroy you in court, discredit every accusation, and when you're locked away in a psychiatric facility, I'll visit you there. Mental hospitals have such interesting acoustic properties." Marcus pulled himself to his feet and stumbled toward the street, putting distance between himself and the house where 846 people had died, to feed one man's obsession with the sounds of human suffering. His cell phone, which had been dead for weeks due to what he'd thought was battery failure, suddenly showed full signal strength once he was beyond the range of Crane's electronic interference. With shaking hands, he dialed 911. Salem Police, what's your emergency? My name is Marcus Reed. I'm calling to report multiple homicides at 1247 Chestnut Street. The owner, Dr. Nathaniel Crane, has been murdering tenants for decades and recording their deaths. I just escaped from the basement where he keeps his mic collection. The investigation that followed would take months to complete and involved audio forensic specialists from the FBI, psychoacoustic experts from multiple universities, and a team of technicians who spent weeks documenting the sophisticated acoustic manipulation systems Crane had built into the Victorian house. The basement archive contained evidence of crimes spanning 34 years and at least 427 confirmed murders, making Dr. Nathaniel Crane one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His victims had come from all walks of life, united only by their vulnerability and isolation, exactly the characteristics that had made them attractive tenants for his carefully marketed studio space. Crane's Requiem for the Human Condition was never played in its entirety. The 6-hour composition was deemed too psychologically dangerous for public exposure, its acoustic properties capable of inducing severe trauma responses in listeners. The FBI classified it as an acoustic weapon and ordered all copies destroyed. Dr. Nathaniel Crane was found dead in his basement 3 days after Marcus's escape, killed by his own equipment when he apparently tried to activate a final acoustic assault that exceeded the safety parameters of his speakers. The official cause of death was listed as catastrophic acoustic trauma. His brain essentially liquefied by sound waves that reached dangerous amplitudes when the house's damaged speaker system created destructive interference patterns. Marcus survived his ordeal but never fully recovered. The weeks of subsonic manipulation had caused permanent neurological damage that left him hypersensitive to certain frequencies. He could no longer tolerate most musical environments, and sounds that others found normal would trigger severe panic attacks. He moved back to the Pacific Northwest, far from Salem and its acoustic nightmares, and established a non-profit organization dedicated to identifying and stopping technology-assisted predators. His experience with Crane's methods helped law enforcement recognize similar patterns in other cases, leading to the discovery of 3 additional acoustic killers operating in different states. But late at night, when the world was quiet and his damaged nervous system was at its most vulnerable, Marcus would sometimes hear echoes of that final basement recording session, not through his ears, but burned into his neurological memory where Dr. Nathaniel Crane's perfect acoustic hell would play forever. The sound collector had been stopped, his symphony left forever unfinished. But for Marcus Reed, the music would never truly end.